Chapter 4586. Bai Zixian was completely infuriated by Nie Tian's arrogance and directly attacked. The immortal force around his body erupted, engulfing heaven and earth. Roaring dragon, roar tiger palm. Someone immediately recognized Bai Zixian's palm technique and cried out in shock. It turned out that Bai Zixian used a set of basic palm technique of the Fengtian sect, called Roaring Dragon Roar Tiger Palm. When mastered, the sound of roaring dragon and tiger could be heard in the void. Although Roaring Dragon Roar Tiger Palm was only a set of basic palm technique, it was not easy to completely master it. Most people, immersed in it for a lifetime, would not be able to reach the acme of perfection, so there would not be the sound of roaring dragon and tiger. But when Bai Zixian attacked, the roaring dragon and tiger pierced the ears. Obviously, he had practiced this set of palm technique to the acme of perfection. Moreover, when he attacked, he directly used his full strength without any scruples. At this time, everyone could see that Bai Zixian did not want to force Nie Tian out of the circle at all. He clearly wanted to take Nie Tian's life. But Nie Tian, in the face of the palm that threatened his life, was cold and fearless. His body was like a mountain, and he was as still as a bell. Everyone's eyes trembled, and their expressions clearly said, "Is this guy crazy?" In the face of Bai Zixian's full-strength palm, Nie Tian did not dodge, and did not even move to defend. Was he not courting death? Bang! In the next moment, the surging palm force fell, and after a muffled sound, the roaring dragon and tiger came to an abrupt end. Bai Zixian's body seemed to be impacted, and he slightly swayed, then immediately stood firm. Looking at Nie Tian, he did not move at all, and there was still a confident and contemptuous smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. This! Everyone's eyes trembled violently, and they all gasped, looking at the silver-haired young man in front of them with incomparable horror, completely speechless. How is this possible? Bai Zixian screamed in horror. His originally masculine voice became shrill. His full-strength palm strike caught Nie Tian off guard, and he resisted it with his body, but he was not injured at all. This was really too terrifying. It should be known that even the opponent, an Earth-stage celestial venerable, would not dare to be careless with this palm. Could it be that Nie Tian already possesses the strength of a heaven-rank immortal exalt? But this was absolutely impossible. Nie Tian looked to be in his early 20s, and it was utterly impossible for him to have a cultivation at the heaven rank. There weren't many heaven-rank immortal venerables in the entire immortal Qi continent, let alone a mere outsider like Nie Tian. This is your power? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He didn't hide his disdain at all. Coldly, he spat out 4 words, a mess. You! Bai Zixian's complexion changed, and he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Continue. You still have 2 more moves. Nie Tian was a little impatient and said coldly. He admitted that Bai Zixian did have some talent and strength, but he was still far from being able to injure him. Nie Tian didn't have the strength of a heaven-rank immortal venerable, but his martial body wasn't any weaker than a heaven-rank immortal venerable. He had long discovered that the strength of cultivators might not be weaker than martial artists, but their bodies were far weaker than martial artists. Even though the current Nie Tian didn't have his 10th lifeline, his martial body was still far from being comparable to martial artists of the same level. It was precisely because of this that Nie Tian easily withstood Bai Zixian's palm strike. Kid, you've angered me. Bai Zixian suddenly calmed down. His eyes were cold and murderous as he spoke in a low voice. I've angered many people. You won't make a difference. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. Although he didn't show any fear on the surface, he was a little more cautious in his heart. A genius like Bai Zixian definitely had a side that surpassed others. Perhaps he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet. Very well. Bai Zixian's eyes were gloomy and his voice was hoarse. He moved his palms at the same time, and immortal force circulated around his body. Suddenly, an unusual aura was released. His palms were covered with a layer of flame, but it didn't feel scorching at all. Instead, it made people feel a kind of cold and white chill. This is... When the onlookers saw this scene, they obviously also felt the unusual aura, and their faces all changed. "It's Bai Zixian's immortal spirit," someone exclaimed. Obviously, they didn't expect that Bai Zixian would even use immortal spirit. Immortal spirit? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't have the slightest fear, but was a little curious. Not long ago, when Qin Qinglan tested Gao Jin's immortal root, Gao Jin had explained that the immortal root test mainly consisted of three aspects: immortal palace, celestial elephant, and immortal spirit. And just now, Nie Tian saw that the immortals who were cultivating in the immortal ground all had a group of vortexes floating above their heads, which was their immortal palace. At this moment, Bai Zixian took the initiative to release immortal spirit, so that Nie Tian had a better understanding of immortal cultivators. Nie Tian speculated that the so-called immortal spirit of immortal cultivators should be similar to the original spirit of martial artists, which was the manifestation of the power in their bodies. Bai Zixian, quickly put away your immortal spirit. Qin Qinglan was a little anxious at this time, and shouted in a low voice. Boy, the second move. Bai Zixian didn't pay attention to Qin Qinglan at all. His eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, as if the latter was his father's murderer. Bai Zixian, are you crazy? Qin Qinglan was very frightened and shouted. However, it was too late. Boom! Bai Zixian slapped his palm, and the immortal spirit flame whistled through the air, condensed into a line of fire in the air, and then instantly soared, pressing down on Nie Tian with the momentum of the sky. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly and his mind moved. The chaotic flame operated, and a layer of flame shield appeared around his body. The next moment, the rolling flame fell, but after touching the shield around Nie Tian, it was like a clay ox entering the sea, unable to hurt Nie Tian at all. Impossible! Bai Zixian was shocked by the scene in front of him, and then he screamed. His immortal spirit, the cold bone flame, did not cause any harm to Nie Tian. How was this possible? The others were also shocked, and they couldn't speak for a long time. Your immortal spirit is good, but it's still far from being able to break my chaotic flame. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said directly, there's still the third move. What else do you have? Just use it. Bai Zixian froze in place like a fool. Although his lips were twitching, he couldn't make a sound. Everyone looked at Bai Zixian, who was in a daze, and many people started whispering. Bai Zixian used the immortal spirit, but he still couldn't force this person out of the circle. It's really embarrassing. It's more than embarrassing. The cost of using the immortal spirit is too high. The immortal spirit is the foundation of a cultivator's celestial path. How can it be used at will? Alas, this time Bai Zixian really kicked an iron plate. The crowd was talking, and they looked at Bai Zixian with sympathy in their eyes, but more of it was sneering. For a cultivator, the immortal spirit was like a martial artist's vital meridian. The cost of using the immortal spirit was extremely high. Not only would it consume the cultivator's lifespan, but it would also damage the celestial path's foundation, and even cause the cultivator's celestial path talent to decline. This time, Bai Zixian really suffered a great loss. I've lost. After a long while, Bai Zixian gave Nie Tian a frustrated look. It was as if he had used up all of his strength to say those three simple words. The Feng Tian Sect's celestial path genius did not even use the third move and directly admitted defeat. Chapter 45-87. Bai Zixian admitted defeat. This scene caused everyone present to be stunned in unison, and they stared at Bai Zixian with their mouths agape. Who would have thought that the arrogant genius of the immortal cultivation circle would admit defeat without even using the third move? Qin Qinglan was also flabbergasted. She looked at Nie Tian with unconcealable fear in her eyes. Although she had seen Nie Tian fight and had a certain understanding of his strength, she was still shocked at this moment. Bai Zixian used the celestial spirit, which was supposed to be a lose-lose strategy. Unexpectedly, it didn't affect Nie Tian at all. Qin Qinglan suddenly had a feeling that Nie Tian was like a boundless, bottomless ocean. She was very sure that if she didn't accept Nie Tian's proposal at that time, he would really kill her. On the other side, Liang Zhao finally came to his senses, but he was already in a cold sweat unconsciously. He was very lucky that he didn't fight with Nie Tian at that time. Otherwise, his end would definitely be much worse than Bai Zixian's. After a short moment, under the gazes of everyone that sighed with emotion, Bai Zixian left in a desolate manner. His figure was disappearing while his footsteps staggered, and he'd lost the spirit and arrogance he had earlier. Nie Tian frowned, and there was a touch of bitterness at the corner of his mouth. He had seen many talented people, but once they suffered a huge blow, they couldn't recover. He hoped that Bai Zixian was not such a fragile genius. Master Qin, let's go. Nie Tian ignored the gaze of others and looked at Qin Qinglan. Qin Qinglan seemed to wake up from a dream. She nodded and walked ahead to lead the way. Master Qin, I just heard those people say that the celestial spirit is very important to the cultivators and can't be used at will, right? On the way, Qing Qi couldn't help asking. Obviously, he was very curious about the cultivators. Yes. Qin Qinglan nodded and said, the celestial palace, the celestial elephant, and the celestial spirit are called the three celestial roots of the immortals. Among them, the celestial palace is also called the celestial root, the celestial elephant is also called the earth immortal root, and the celestial spirit is also called the human immortal root. The celestial root is the celestial palace, which represents the luck and comprehension of the celestial power of the immortals. The earth immortal root is also known as the immortal elephant. It represents the strength of an immortal's body and the ability to absorb and fuse immortal force. The mortal immortal root, also known as the immortal spirit, represents the life force and talent of an immortal. In a way, it also affects the immortal Tao foundation of an immortal. Because immortal essences are extremely important, immortals wouldn't use immortal essences unless they had no other choice. Once they do, then not only would it harm their vitality, it might even harm their foundation in the immortal Tao. When he spoke up to hear, Qin Qinglan clearly thought of Bai Zixian, and he couldn't help but sigh. He said, he's still too young and he's too impulsive. Otherwise, he wouldn't have suffered such an unexpected calamity today. So that's what the three great immortal roots mean. Qing Qi was obviously not interested in Qin Qinglan's last words. He nodded and seemed to be thinking about something. Master Qin, I feel that the young man called Bai Zixian is not an undeserved calamity. Mo Rushi, who was standing on the side, said lightly, with his temperament, even if he didn't provoke Nie Tian today, he would have provoked others in the future. Nie Tian is not a person who fights bravely. Just now, he was just passively injured. If Bai Zixian had encountered someone else, he might not have ended up like this. Moreover, what happened today may not be a bad thing for him. If he can learn from it, it will definitely be of great benefit to his future immortal cultivation. When Qin Qinglan heard Mo Rushi's words, she couldn't help but frown, looking a little surprised. She didn't expect that Mo Rushi, who looked as elegant as an orchid, would suddenly say such a thing. Even though Mo Rushi's words exonerated Nie Tian, what she said was not without reason. Whether it's immortal cultivation or martial arts cultivation, it's often not talent that determines a person's achievements, but temperament and perseverance. At this time, Nie Tian also said, with Bai Zixian's current temperament, even if his talent is improved to a higher level, his future achievements will be limited. But if he can walk out of today's blow, restrain his arrogance, and regain his spirit, his future will be limitless. Qin Qinglan's eyes flickered, and she was stunned for a moment, not knowing how to respond to Nie Tian. For a moment, she couldn't adapt to the fact that there was such a profound side to Nie Tian under such an arrogant appearance. Perhaps arrogance was just Nie Tian's appearance, and unfathomable was his real heart. After a while, Qin Qinglan and Nie Tian came to a magnificent hall. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he keenly perceived that there was a layer of immortal force surging outside the hall, which was obviously protected by an immortal formation. At this time, they stood outside the hall, and in front of them were thousands of stone steps. Nie Tian, you wait here first, I'll go and report to the Inquisitor. Qin Qinglan gestured for Nie Tian and the others to stop, and then she walked up the stone steps and soon entered the hall. It seems that the rules of the Fengtian sect are very strict. Looking at the hall in front of him, Nie Tian could not help but smile bitterly. Even though the Fengtian sect in the all-heavens sacred world had countless peaks and peaks, none of them had such a magnificent hall, and none of them needed such strict rules. Qing Qi did not care. His eyes flashed with a fiery light as he stared at the hall, as if he had discovered a new continent. Nie Tian knew that Qing Qi was studying the immortal formation outside the hall. Qin Qinglan entered the hall for a full 2 hours, and then she finally came out. Her pretty face was a little ugly, and it seemed that the negotiation with the Inquisitor did not go well. Master Qin, how was it? Seeing that Qin Qinglan had returned, Nie Tian had been waiting anxiously for a long time, so he immediately asked. The Inquisitor asked you to see him alone. Qin Qinglan seemed to be a little nervous and said, but he doesn't want to talk to you about anything else. He just wants to know about the situation when I was ambushed that day. Understood. Nie Tian nodded, glanced at Qing Qi and Emorushi, and then stepped onto the stone steps in front of him. Nie Tian guessed that Inquisitor Fengtian probably did not want to see him, but Qin Qinglan mentioned the ambush by the men in black, so Inquisitor Fengtian was interested to know about it. There were thousands of stone steps, and every step was supported by immortal power. The pressure was so great that even Nie Tian could not help but pant when he stood on the last step. But at least, he managed to make it up. Walking quickly to the door of the hall, Nie Tian saw a sage-like figure sitting in the midst of the incense from afar. Looks like this is Inquisitor Fengtian. Nie Tian murmured in his heart and walked into the hall step by step, but he did not approach that person. Instead, he bowed from afar and said respectfully, Junior Nie Tian greets the Inquisitor. Inquisitor Fengtian's hair and beard were all white. He closed his eyes and did not speak, as if he was asleep. Junior Nie Tian greets the Inquisitor. Eyebrows furrowed, Nie Tian bowed again. But Inquisitor Fengtian still did not respond. Nie Tian felt strange, and could not help but take a few steps forward. Finally, he saw Inquisitor Fengtian's face clearly, and was suddenly shocked. This face was actually haggard, like that of a zombie, without the slightest trace of blood. Moreover, Nie Tian did not feel the slightest fluctuation of aura from Inquisitor Fengtian. It seemed that Inquisitor Fengtian had already passed away. Chapter 45-88. Nie Tian approached the Inquisitor, but he could not feel any aura from the latter. His heart sank and he was horrified. At this moment, he had a strong feeling that the Inquisitor had passed away. But how was this possible? Qin Qinglan had just left the hall. Junior Nie Tian greets the Inquisitor. Nie Tian did not dare to be careless. He opened his mouth again and stared at the withered old man in front of him, hoping that the latter would have some reaction. But to his disappointment, the Fengtian Inquisitor didn't move at all. Nie Tian's eyes darkened. He took a deep breath and decided to take a closer look. He came in front of the Inquisitor and saw the latter's appearance clearly. It was a rotten face like that of a zombie. His skin was like a dead leaf, and his bones were clearly visible. He looked like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. Let's leave first. Nie Tian thought for a while and decided to leave first. He wanted to ask Qin Qinglan what was going on. Phew! Knock, knock, knock. But at this moment the Inquisitor reacted. He first exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, then coughed. The sound was also very dry, like the sound of knocking on the door. Lord Inquisitor! Nye Tian was shocked. He looked at the person in front of him and screamed, "You!" The Inquisitor's closed eyes suddenly opened. The moment he saw Nye Tian, he released a ray of light. Then, he suddenly stretched out his rotten wood-like arm, and his withered palm was like an iron clamp, clasping Nye Tian's wrist tightly. Lord Inquisitor! Nye Tian was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, and he let out another exclamation. Although the Inquisitor was like a withered branch, his arm was still very strong. Even Nye Tian felt that his wrist was going to break. In the next moment, a jade thumb ring appeared in Inquisitor Feng Tian's other hand, and he put it on Nye Tian's thumb without saying a word. This. Nye Tian was taken aback, a puzzled look on his face. Immediately after, the jade ring seemed to merge with Nye Tian. After flashing a few times, it disappeared. Then, before Nye Tian could react, Inquisitor Feng Tian's body shook and he fell to the ground. He was no longer alive. How could this be? Nye Tian took 2 steps back and looked at the Sky Inquisitor, who had already passed away. His face was filled with shock and confusion. Things happened too suddenly, causing him to be unable to react for a moment. Hum. Buzz. Hum. At this moment, a series of deep and powerful bell tolls suddenly sounded from outside the hall, causing everyone to feel a sense of urgency. Oh no! Nye Tian's eyes trembled violently, and he suddenly reacted. His expression changed greatly, and he immediately turned around and dashed out of the hall. Unfortunately, it was too late. Above the hall, an invisible force suddenly spread out, like an invisible net, firmly trapping Nye Tian. Nye Tian dashed left and right, but he could not escape. Then, figures in black descended and surrounded Nye Tian in the blink of an eye. Nye Tian looked at the figures in black around him. Even though he was a little flustered, he forced himself to maintain basic calmness. How dare you kill the Inquisitor? What crime do you deserve? The leading man in black roared angrily. His voice was deafening like the sound of a diamond. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He was already prepared, but facing the scene in front of him, he still found it difficult to remain calm. When the sky beacon bell rang, he knew that he might be regarded as the person who killed the Inquisitor. He did not defend himself. He knew that the men in black in front of him did not have the power to punish him. Sure enough, a moment later, a burly figure appeared outside the hall. His aura was like a mountain, and he strode into the hall. Lord Feng Ji. When the men in black saw him, they all bowed respectfully. Feng Ji. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he carefully looked at the man. It was a middle-aged man. He was extremely burly, at least 2 meters tall. His facial features were as sharp as a knife. Although he had experienced many vicissitudes of life, he still could not hide his heroic spirit. The man in black called him Feng Ji. It seemed that he was one of the 3 Feng Ji. Qin Qinglan had said that the Feng Tian immortal was in seclusion, and all the affairs of the Feng Tian sect were handled by the 3 Feng Ji. The Inquisitor and Feng Ji should be the 3 Feng Ji. Feng Ji looked gloomy and nodded. He did not look at Nye Tian, but moved to the Inquisitor's corpse. After watching for a long time, Feng Ji turned around. His eyes were as sharp as blades. He stared at Nye Tian and said cold, "Did you kill the Inquisitor?" "I did not kill the Inquisitor. When I came to the hall, the Inquisitor had already passed away." Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he replied. He did not say what happened before the Inquisitor died because he did not want Feng Ji to decide everything alone. There was still one person from the 3 Feng Ji. Nye Tian wanted to wait for that person to appear before he could explain everything. "Is that so?" Feng Ji snorted. His eyes twitched. He suddenly stretched out his hand and an invisible force swept through the air, grabbing onto Nye Tian's neck. Nye Tian's eyes trembled. He wanted to resist, but he felt that his whole body was sore and weak. He could not exert any strength. Without a doubt, Feng Zhi was a fifth realm celestial lord. Stop! At this moment, a low voice was heard. A figure appeared. It was as graceful as an immortal. Nie Tian's gaze shifted, and he saw a young woman appear. Her aura was like a rainbow, and she forced the peak leader to take a step back. Nie Tian immediately felt the pressure disappear. He took a few deep breaths. Spirit seat. Feng's was stabilized his body, his sharp gaze slightly congealed, locking onto the lady from afar. So, this lady was the other person from the three Feng Zhi, Spirit Seat. Feng Zhi, Inquisitor, Feng Zhi, and Spirit Seat. Feng Zhi, what happened here? Spirit Seat also looked at Feng Zhi and asked. Feng Zhi and Spirit Seat did not have a good relationship. Feng Zhi's mouth twitched. Inquisitor passed away. The murderer is this silver-haired kid. What? Spirit Seat was shocked. He moved and arrived in front of Inquisitor's corpse. He looked at it for a long time but did not say anything. Feng Zhi looked at Spirit Seat. His mouth twitched as if he was thinking. The black-robed men around him did not say anything. Their faces were filled with fear as if they were worried about something. After a long time, Spirit Seat suddenly turned around. His eyes flashed with a strange cold light. He stared at Nie Tian but did not say anything. Nie Tian felt that Spirit Seat's expression was not right. He could not help but be surprised. Could it be that Spirit Seat had something to do with the dead Inquisitor? Spirit Seat, this kid is the murderer of Inquisitor. Don't you want to avenge your master? At this time, Feng Zhi spoke. His tone had a hint of playfulness. Master? When Nie Tian heard this word, his heart sank. So, Inquisitor was Spirit Seat's master. No wonder Spirit Seat's reaction was so unusual. This was bad. Feng Zhi wanted to kill Nie Tian. This Spirit Seat would not let Nie Tian go. Chapter 4589. Nie Tian never thought that the dead interrogator would be the Spirit Seat's teacher, which caught him off guard. Just now, Feng Xing had already expressed his killing intent, but was stopped by the Spirit Seat. If the Spirit Seat also thought that Nie Tian was the murderer of the interrogator, then wouldn't Nie Tian be doomed? The Spirit Seat's beautiful eyes were like frost, carefully sizing up Nie Tian, but did not say a word for a long time. The surrounding black-robed men did not dare to speak, even Feng Xing was silent. Mysterious Heaven Guard! After a long time, the Spirit Seat finally opened his mouth and bellowed. Here! A black-robed man by the side answered. Lock him up in the heaven-forbidden prison, without my orders. No one is allowed to see him. The Spirit Seat spoke, intentionally emphasizing the word, no one. Yes. The black-robed man obeyed. Spirit Seat, this person killed the interrogator, but you're locking him up in the heaven-forbidden prison, isn't that inappropriate? Feng Xing's face darkened and asked cold. Teacher was killed, this Seat is more heartbroken than anyone else, and wants revenge more than anyone else. The Spirit Seat looked at Feng Xing coldly and said, but there are some things that this Seat needs to investigate clearly. Caught red-handed, this person killed the interrogator, what else do you need to investigate? Feng Xing's eyes darkened and shouted cold. To him, the Spirit Seat was obviously stalling for time, intentionally protecting Nie Tian. Feng Xing, do you really think that he has the strength to kill the interrogator? The Spirit Seat suddenly turned, his eyes were like sharp blades, staring at Feng Xing. Feng Xing seemed to be frightened by the Spirit Seat, and was startled, then said, This brat is an outside martial artist, his body contains an extremely strong power, not much weaker than you and I. If it was the interrogator at his peak, naturally he would not die in his hands. But, speaking till here, Feng Xing laughed and continued, but the interrogator has been old for a long time, his lifespan is near its end, his immortal spirit is not as strong as before, if he was caught off guard, it would not be strange to be killed by this brat. Is that so? The spirit seat's mouth twitched, his gaze was somewhat dazed, and he muttered, "So the interrogator is like this in your eyes. Isn't it?" Feng Zhuxi's gaze turned gloomy and sneered. Although the three sky beacons were called the same, there was a difference between them. The Inquisitor was second only to the Feng Tian Immortal, and his position was higher than the Vanguard seat and the Spirit seat. When the three departments discussed matters, the Inquisitor was usually the leader. Moreover, the Spirit seat was the direct disciple of the Inquisitor. Yunting did not feel that the death of the Inquisitor was a bad thing. He had always coveted the position of Inquisitor, and this was his chance. He had long felt that the Feng Tian sect would not benefit from an old and frail man who always occupied the position of Inquisitor. If I told you that 3 days ago, the Inquisitor reached Realm 6, would you still think that way? Spirit Throne Mu Jin sneered, and looked at Yunting with disdain. How could she not know what Yunting was thinking? She just didn't want to expose him. What did you say? Yunting was shocked, thinking that he had misheard. The sixth realm. The Inquisitor had broken through to the sixth realm. How was that possible? There were only a handful of sixth realm immortal venerables in the entire immortal Qi continent. Even the Feng Tian Immortal was only at the fifth realm. Had the Inquisitor really broken through to the sixth realm? You'll know when you see the Inquisitor's body, Mu Jin said coldly, not wanting to talk nonsense. Then, she and the Xiantian guard took Nietian away. In the hall, Yunting looked at the Inquisitor's body with trembling eyes filled with disbelief. There was an extremely hard-to-detect mark on the forehead of the Inquisitor's body. It was shaped like a crescent moon, and there was a faint surge of immortal power. Immortal mark. Yunting recognized that the crescent moon mark was an immortal mark. It would only appear on the body of a sixth realm immortal venerable. Mu Jin was right. The Inquisitor had reached the sixth realm. Lord Inquisitor, Yunting swears to catch the murderer and avenge you. After a long time, Yunting bowed deeply to the Inquisitor's body. His eyes burned with anger and determination. The Feng Tian sect had finally produced a grand immortal venerable, but he died just like that. How could he not be angry? At this point, Yunting no longer thought that Nietian was the murderer of the Inquisitor. Since the Inquisitor had reached the sixth realm, how could Nietian have a chance to kill him? In this world, only a grand immortal venerable could kill a grand immortal venerable. There was a high possibility that a grand immortal venerable was hiding in the Feng Tian sect. Feng Tian sect, celestial prison. Nietian sat in his cell, his mind unsettled. When he was taken out of the hall, he didn't see Qin Qi, Mo Rushi, or even Qin Qinglan. After entering the hall, everything happened too suddenly. Nietian was unprepared and panicked. But now that he thought about it, it seemed that Qin Qinglan was very suspicious. At that time, Qin Qinglan came out of the hall and seemed very nervous. Moreover, from the time Qin Qinglan walked out of the hall to the time Nietian entered the hall, only a very short time had passed. The Inquisitor had already stepped into the sixth stage of the great immortal venerable realm. Who could kill him in such a short period of time? Perhaps someone in the immortal Qi continent could easily kill a grand immortal venerable who had just stepped into the sixth realm, but it was almost impossible to do so without making a sound. Before Nietian entered the hall, he didn't hear any sound. This was the strange part. Before Master Qin entered the hall, the Inquisitor had been seriously injured and was on the verge of death. After a while, Nietian had a guess in his heart. The reason why Master Qin lied was most likely because she was threatened. The person who killed the Inquisitor was lurking around Master Qin and secretly controlling her every move. Upon coming to this conclusion, Nietian's heart sank, and his expression flickered. If his guess was right, then Qin Qinglan, Mo Rushi, and Qing Qi couldn't have been kidnapped by the murderer, right? Oh no! Nietian's heart trembled inexplicably and he shouted, "Help, help!" But after shouting for a long time, no one responded. Damn it! Nie Tian let out a bellow as he made up his mind to break out of the heaven-forbidden prison. But just as he was about to circulate his yuan meridians, he felt an invisible force appear and instantly fill his body. It was like a seal, imprisoning his yuan meridians. Pfft! Nie Tian frowned and was unwilling to give up. He forcefully circulated his yuan meridians and tried to break through the seal, but a surge of qi and blood caused him to spurt out a mouthful of blood. How could this be? Nie Tian turned pale with fright. This heaven-forbidden prison was much stronger than he expected. Don't waste your energy, you won't be able to get out of the heaven-forbidden prison. At this moment, a cold but familiar voice suddenly sounded, causing Nie Tian's expression to change. It's you. Nie Tian suddenly turned around and saw a familiar face. It was Mu Jin from the Sky Beacon Spirit Seat. He never thought that Mu Jin would be in the prison as well. You've been lurking around me? Nie Tian was shocked and asked loudly. He actually didn't sense Mu Jin's aura at all. If the latter didn't take the initiative to appear, he still wouldn't have noticed. Chapter 4590. In the Celestial Prison. Nie Tian was surprised to see Mu Jin suddenly appear. He never expected that Mu Jin had been lurking around him without him noticing. You really are not the murderer of Master. Mu Jin, the spirit seat of the heaven beacons, looked at Nie Tian with deep worry on her delicate face. Aren't you sure that I don't have the ability to kill the Inquisitor? Nie Tian asked coldly, his eyes darkening. It was just a guess. Now I'm sure. Mu Jin regained her composure and said indifferently, Now that you are sure that I am not the murderer, please let me out immediately. Nie Tian was worried about the safety of Mo Rushi and the others. What are you worried about? Mu Jin could see Nie Tian's nervousness and asked with a frown. My friend. Nie Tian didn't want to waste time, so he directly told her about Mo Rushi and the others. Finally, he said, Since I am not the murderer, then the one who killed the Inquisitor must be someone else. I think that person is now lurking in the Fengtian sect, and is very likely to have taken my friend. You said that you were ambushed in Fengming Mountain? Mu Jin, on the other hand, was neither anxious nor slow as she calmly asked. Yes. Although Nie Tian was anxious, he had no choice but to say, Those men in black killed several people around Master Qin, and Master Qin was almost killed by them. I didn't see anyone outside the hall. Mu Jin thought for a moment and said, But don't worry. I will send someone to find Qin Qinglan and ask her face to face. After that, she moved and disappeared out of thin air. You! Nie Tian was stunned. He wanted to go out with Mu Jin, but it was too late. The celestial prison was a cage for Nie Tian, but it didn't stop Mu Jin. If I am not wrong, this celestial prison has this woman's bloodline restriction. At this time, the fat cat, who hadn't appeared for a long time, suddenly said, Bloodline restriction? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Doesn't that mean that only she can open the heaven-forbidden prison? Yes. The fat cat nodded and said, Don't be too anxious now. Even if the murderer takes Mo Rushi and the others away, he may not hurt them. Why? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, unable to react for a moment. Since that person could kill a 6th-stage, immortal venerable, he must be very strong. If he wanted to harm Mo Rushi and the others, he could have just killed them outside the hall. Why would he need to abduct them? Fat Cat replied. Nie Tian nodded in understanding. Since there were no corpses of Mo Rushi and the others outside the hall, it meant that the man had only abducted them and had no intention of harming them. Following that, Nie Tian had no choice but to obediently wait in the heaven-forbidden prison. About an hour later, Mu Jin finally returned. However, her face was dark and gloomy. Spirit Seat, have you found Qin Qinglan? Nie Tian's heart sank when he saw that Mu Jin's expression was not right. Mu Jin shook her head and said solemnly, I sent people to search the Fengtian sect, but they couldn't find Qin Qinglan. She seems to have disappeared completely. Damn it! Nie Tian roared and punched the stone wall beside him. They must have been taken away by that person. Mu Jin's eyes trembled at this moment, and she looked at Nie Tian with a surprised expression. She noticed that when Nie Tian punched just now, there was a strange fluctuation of immortal force. Logically speaking, Nie Tian was not an immortal cultivator, and there was no immortal force in his body, so how could there be a fluctuation of immortal force? Have you cultivated the immortal Tao? Mu Jin frowned and couldn't help asking. No. Nie Tian was a little upset and shook his head. Give me your hand. Mu Jin's expression changed slightly, and she said hurriedly. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, but he still stretched out his hand. Mu Jin's eyes narrowed slightly, and a strange light was released from her eyes, falling precisely on Nie Tian's hand, and then a strange scene happened. When the strange light fell, it actually stirred up a strange vortex on Nie Tian's palm. Nie Tian was shocked by the scene in front of him, and his expression changed. The vortex seemed to be a little familiar. Right, it was very similar to the vortex above the heads of the immortal cultivators he saw on the immortal ground. It was a bit like the immortal palace of the immortal cultivators. But how was this possible? Nie Tian was not an immortal cultivator, so how could his palm release the same power as the immortal palace? What's going on? Nie Tian was at a loss, and he had no idea what was going on in front of him. Why is this aura so familiar? Mu Jin didn't seem to hear Nie Tian's words, and her beautiful eyes flickered as if she was thinking about something. Master. Suddenly, Mu Jin's pretty face changed, and she said in surprise, "This is the aura of Master's immortal power." Lord Interrogator? Nie Tian was stunned at first, and then his expression changed as well. He remembered the scene before the interrogator died. Before the interrogator died, he put a thumb ring on Nie Tian's finger. But the strange thing was that the thumb ring then disappeared. Nie Tian was so anxious that he forgot about it. Is this the thumb ring? After listening to Nie Tian, Mu Jin stretched out her thumb, and showed him a white jade thumb ring. Yes, it's exactly the same jade thumb ring as this one. Seeing the jade ring on Mu Jin's hand, Nie Tian couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He then said, "But the jade ring suddenly disappeared after I put it on my finger. I don't know how to get it back." Nie Tian didn't expect Mu Jin to have an identical jade thumb ring. Was it something like a keepsake between master and disciple? The Ring of Judgment. Mu Jin was stunned for a moment, and only said these words after a long time. The Ring of Judgment? Nie Tian saw Mu Jin's big reaction, and he couldn't help but be stunned. What was this Ring of Judgment? It seemed to have a great origin. The 3 peaks of Fengtian each have an immortal ring, which is a symbol of identity and position. Mu Jin calmed down and said, "The interrogators is the Ring of Judgment, the vanguards is the Ring of Sharp Flame, and the Spirit Masters is the Ring of Spiritual Deity. 3 immortal rings have always been worn by the 3 peaks, and they have been passed down from generation to generation. Every 3 peaks of the Fengtian sect will inject their own immortal power into the immortal ring, and after years of accumulation, who knows how much immortal power there is in the immortal ring." Saying this, her eyes trembled, and she looked at Nie Tian and said, "I never thought that master would pass the Ring of Judgment to you." "Pass it to me?" Nie Tian frowned and suddenly thought of something. He said in surprise, "What do you mean?" The 3 immortal rings were passed down from generation to generation, and they were the 3 symbols of status. Before the interrogator died, he gave the Ring of Judgment to Nie Tian, and it was obvious that he wanted to pass it down. "Master has chosen you to be the next Fengtian Inquisitor." Mu Jin's eyes were deep, but the huge waves in her heart could still be seen. She never dreamed that her master would choose an outsider to be the Fengtian Inquisitor. Chapter 4591. What did you say? Nie Tian's expression changed when he heard Mu Jin's words. He was very surprised. The Inquisitor chose him to be the next Sky Inquisitor. Was this a joke? The Ring of Judgment is the symbol of the Inquisitor. It is also an item passed down from generation to generation. Mu Jin calmed down and said, "Before teacher died, he gave the Ring of Judgment to you. He chose you to be the next Inquisitor." "That's impossible." Nie Tian frowned and said, "Maybe I appeared before the Inquisitor died, and he only gave me the Ring of Judgment for safekeeping." Mu Jin shook her head and said, "The Ring of Judgment has the Inquisitor's bloodline imprint. Only by removing the imprint can the Ring of Judgment be taken off. Before teacher died, he voluntarily removed the imprint and gave the Ring of Judgment to you. This means that you are his inheritor." This. Nie Tian was taken aback and didn't know what to say. Also, the Ring of Judgment is spiritual and not just anyone can wear it. Mu Jin nodded and said, "Since you can wear the Ring of Judgment, it means that you have been recognized by the ring. But I don't even know how to use the Ring of Judgment." Nie Tian was at a loss. He couldn't even sense the existence of the Ring of Judgment, nor did he know how to make the Ring of Judgment appear. "You just received the Ring of Judgment and need to establish a new bloodline imprint." Mu Jin's eyes darkened and said, "It usually takes 3 to 5 days to establish a bloodline imprint. Once the imprint is established, you will be able to control the Ring of Judgment freely." "So that's how it is." Nie Tian nodded in understanding, but his expression didn't look good. The Ring of Judgment made him become the Sky Beacon Inquisitor for no reason. In this way, he became a member of the Fengtian sect and held a high position. But he didn't know anything about the Fengtian sect and didn't want to stay here for long. What was more troublesome was how many people recognized him as the Sky Inquisitor. Not to mention others, even Mu Jin didn't have a clear attitude. "Nie Tian, can you tell me what happened when you saw Master?" A moment later, Mu Jin had completely calmed down. She looked at Nie Tian with a strange gaze and asked in a deep voice. Nie Tian nodded and recounted everything that had happened in the hall in full detail. "You're saying that in the beginning, you thought Master was dead, but then Master suddenly came back to life and put the Ring of Judgment on your finger?" After hearing Nie Tian's words, Mu Jin frowned and muttered to herself, "Yes." Nie Tian didn't know what Mu Jin was thinking, so he nodded. "My guess is that the person who killed Master also thought that he had already killed Master." Mu Jin's gaze slightly froze as she said, but he didn't expect that Master actually left him with his last breath. "After that, you appeared, and Master chose you as the next Inquisitor. That should be the case." Nie Tian still didn't hear the main point of Mu Jin's words and just nodded. "I think that before Master died, he must have left important information about the murderer in the Ring of Judgment." Mu Jin's eyes lit up at this moment, and there was a blazing look in her eyes. "That's possible." Nie Tian's eyes also lit up, and he was extremely surprised. The Inquisitor was not directly killed by the murderer, but left him with his last breath and left a message in the Ring of Judgment. It was very reasonable. "Unfortunately, you haven't established a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, so you can't see the information in the Ring of Judgment for the time being." Mu Jin shook her head and smiled bitterly, feeling somewhat helpless. "Spirit Seat, is there any way for me to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment quickly?" Nie Tian couldn't wait any longer and asked anxiously. If he could see the information in the Ring of Judgment, he might be able to find the murderer. Emo Rushi and the others were very likely to be taken away by the murderer, and Nie Tian certainly didn't want to wait a moment longer. "No." Mu Jin shook her head and said, "The bloodline imprint is the internal connection between the Ring of Judgment and the holder, and external forces can't interfere with it. If your bloodline is strong enough, the time needed to establish the bloodline imprint will be shorter, and vice versa." "Then what should we do? Are we going to wait for a few days?" Nie Tian was a little anxious, and his expression was very ugly. He was now worried that if the murderer left Fengming Mountain and took Emo Rushi and the others away, then it would be terrible. The immortal Qi continent was so big, and it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for him to find the murderer. There's no other way but to wait. Mu Jin was also very helpless, and she shook her head and sighed. Then can you let me out now? Nie Tian had no choice but to go out and search. Mu Jin looked at Nie Tian, obviously thinking. After hesitating for a long time, she finally shook her head and said, I'm sorry, you can't go out yet. The matter of the Ring of Judgment can't be made public for now. Although Master has chosen you to be the next Inquisitor, you are still an outsider, and you have just arrived at the Fengtian sect. If the news that you are the next Inquisitor spreads, I'm afraid it will cause unnecessary trouble. I know you won't recognize me, and I don't want to be an Inquisitor. Nie Tian was already mentally prepared for Mu Jin's reaction. His eyes darkened, and he said, When the bloodline imprint is established, I will immediately remove it and return the Ring of Judgment to you. It's not as simple as you think. After the new bloodline imprint is established, it can only be removed after at least 10 years. Mu Jin frowned and said, If you want to remove it in advance, you will have to die. This. Nie Tian frowned. He didn't expect things to be so troublesome. He thought for a moment and said, Then I will temporarily help you keep the Ring of Judgment, and when the bloodline imprint can be removed, I will return it to you. In the meantime, you can find a new Inquisitor. An Inquisitor without the Ring of Judgment, the Fengtian sect will not recognize him. Mu Jin shook her head again and said solemnly, Then what should we do? Nie Tian frowned and said, You don't want to recognize me, and you don't want an Inquisitor without the Ring of Judgment. Isn't this a dilemma? There is a solution, but I don't want to use it until the last moment. Mu Jin frowned and her voice suddenly turned cold. What solution? Nie Tian felt the coldness from Mu Jin and couldn't help but ask. Kill you. Mu Jin looked at Nie Tian, paused and said cold. Nie Tian felt the fleeting murderous intent from her, and suddenly felt a chill run through his body. Indeed, after killing him, and then finding a suitable new owner for the Ring of Judgment, everything would be solved. But Mu Jin didn't seem to want to do this, at least not now. Don't worry, I won't kill you now. Mu Jin let out a long breath and said, I don't know why Master chose you, but since he did this, he must have his reasons. I hope that you can prove that Master's choice is right. You won't kill me, and you won't reveal my identity. Are you going to imprison me forever? Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he asked cold. Chapter 45-92. Nie Tian was worried about the safety of Mo Rushi and the others, but Mu Jin insisted on keeping him in the heaven-forbidden prison. How could he not be angry? However, Mu Jin was very calm. She said indifferently, You are the safest here. Even if you get out, you won't be able to do anything, so I advise you to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment. You are worried that the news of me possessing the Ring of Judgment will be leaked, but only you and I know about this. If we don't say anything, how will others know? Nie Tian was still a little agitated and asked in a cold tone. You don't cultivate the path of immortals, so you don't have any immortal force in your body. When the Ring of Judgment establishes a bloodline imprint with you, the immortal force in it will dissipate to a certain extent. Any slightly stronger immortal would be able to notice it with a single glance. Mu Jin's beautiful brows knit together, and she seemed to have lost her patience as she replied coldly. Nie Tian was rendered speechless for a moment. He also knew that the Fengtian sect would not accept an inquisitor from the outside world. Once the news of the Ring of Judgment was exposed, a large number of people in the Fengtian sect would want his life. Just as Mu Jin said, it was safer for Nie Tian to stay in the heaven-forbidden prison. If you don't want to die, then listen to me. I will let you safely sit in the position of Inquisitor. Mu Jin said in a cold tone, clearly very impatient. Did I say I want to be an Inquisitor? Nie Tian frowned and asked cold. If this Inquisitor was going to be imprisoned in the heaven-forbidden prison, then it was better not to. Between death and becoming an inquisitor, do you have a choice? Mu Jin sneered and disappeared. Nie Tian frowned and his expression was very ugly. Before coming to the Fengtian sect, he was already prepared and knew that this visit would be very difficult. But he never thought that he would encounter an inquisitor being killed. It seemed that he had no other choice but to obediently stay in the heaven-forbidden prison. This woman is not one to be trifled with. I advise you to listen to her arrangements for the time being. At this moment, the Fat Cat appeared and said with a laugh. Nie Tian didn't know why Fat Cat was still so young, so he said with a gloomy expression, "But I don't know if Ru Shi and the others are still alive. Do I have no choice but to wait in this cell? In my opinion, that woman is right. Even if you go out now, you won't be able to do anything." The Fat Cat stopped smiling, thought for a moment, and said, "You know nothing about the Fengtian sect, and that woman hasn't even found the murderer. What can you do out there? Moreover, your current identity is special. If someone were to find out that you have the Ring of Judgment, I'm afraid that even if this woman wants to protect you, she won't be able to. Can't you see that, if the dead Inquisitor wasn't this woman's master and you're the successor chosen by her master, I'm afraid that this woman would kill you first?" Nie Tian frowned and became silent. Indeed, Mu Jin actually wanted to kill Nie Tian. Perhaps it was because she followed her master's will that she chose to help Nie Tian. If it wasn't for Mu Jin, Nie Tian would have died in the hands of Yunting, the Edge leader. I think that you should focus on establishing a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment. That is more important than anything else," the Fat Cat said, and suddenly paused, as if she was hesitating, but she still said, "I have a feeling that the Ring of Judgment isn't as simple as an inheritance token. Behind the Ring of Judgment, there might be other secret. I'm even guessing that the murderer might have killed the Inquisitor because of the Ring of Judgment." "That's possible." Hearing what the Fat Cat said, Nie Tian couldn't help but be surprised. If that was the case, then Nie Tian didn't need to find the murderer. He could just wait for the murderer to find him. If the murderer was after the Ring of Judgment, then he wouldn't have left before he got it. Nie Tian thought and said, since he killed the Inquisitor, but didn't get the Ring of Judgment, shouldn't he have taken the Inquisitor's body away? Maybe he wanted to take it away, but didn't know how to take out the Ring of Judgment, so he was delayed. Then Qin Qinglan suddenly came, so he secretly controlled Qin Qinglan, the Fat Cat thought and said. That can't be right. Nie Tian frowned even more. While thinking, he asked the question in his heart. Since that person controlled Qin Qinglan, then he definitely wouldn't have left the hall before he got the Ring of Judgment. Maybe when the Inquisitor gave me the Ring of Judgment, the murderer was also there. But why didn't he attack me? Maybe he didn't have time, or maybe he was afraid. The Fat Cat nodded slightly. Afraid? Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he said, since the murderer could easily kill the Inquisitor of the Sixth Realm, why would he be afraid of others? Easily killed? The Fat Cat raised his eyebrows and smiled. Who told you that it was easy for that person to kill the Inquisitor? I guess that person was also seriously injured by the Inquisitor. Otherwise, why would he secretly control Qin Qinglan? Nie Tian pondered for a moment, and then fell silent. The Fat Cat's words made some sense. With the strength of the murderer, he shouldn't use this kind of method to secretly control people. But there must be a reason why he did it. Maybe, as Fat Cat said, the murderer also paid the price for killing the Inquisitor. So, when he saw the Spirit and the Edge Leader, he didn't dare to show up, but took Mo Rushi and the others away. Nie Tian, now that the Ring of Judgment is in your hands, the murderer definitely won't dare to do anything to Mo Rushi and the others. The Fat Cat smiled and said, so the most important thing for you now is to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment and figure out what secrets the Ring of Judgment is hiding. In this way, when the murderer appears, you will have a trump card to negotiate with. Yes. Nie Tian nodded heavily and decided to calm down and focus on the matter of the bloodline imprint. Next, Nie Tian didn't waste any more time. He focused on sensing the aura of the Ring of Judgment and tried to establish a bloodline imprint in advance. But unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't sense the existence of the Ring of Judgment. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Why still not? Nye Tian still hadn't established a bloodline imprint, and he couldn't even sense the existence of the Ring of Judgment. He couldn't help but feel anxious and paced back and forth in the heaven-forbidden prison. Moreover, in these 3 days, Mu Jin seemed to have disappeared and didn't appear. According to Mu Jin, the establishment of a bloodline imprint was related to the strength of the bloodline of the holder of the Ring of Judgment. The stronger the bloodline, the shorter the time to establish the bloodline imprint, and vice versa. Nye Tian was very confident in his bloodline, but after 3 days there was no progress at all. How could he not be anxious? Could it be because I'm not an immortal cultivator, so the Ring of Judgment doesn't recognize my bloodline at all? Nye Tian was anxious and began to let his imagination run wild. Cough, cough. At this moment, 2 dry coughs suddenly came from the void, startling Nye Tian. He turned around and saw a man in black standing behind him. Chapter 45-93. Celestial Prison. All of a sudden, Nye Tian heard a dry cough. He turned around and was shocked to find that a black-robed man had been standing behind him since he didn't know when. The man in black was tall, almost as tall as Judge Yunting, but he looked a bit stooped, as if he was very old. The man in black's face was hidden under the black robe. But Nye Tian could clearly feel a surge of celestial force from the man in black. It should be a dark type of celestial force. This was the first time he came into contact with dark celestial force, so he couldn't help but feel nervous. "Little guy, I've been watching you for 3 days. You're really patient." The man in black spoke. He seemed to be laughing, but there was a hint of playfulness in his tone. "Who are you?" Nye Tian forced himself to calm down and asked in a deep voice. What he wanted to ask was, "Why are you here?" Wasn't Mu Jin's bloodline restriction spell in the celestial prison? Why was this person in the prison? Nye Tian could understand that Mu Jin could come and go as she pleased. But how did this person come to the celestial prison? "Don't be nervous, I mean you no harm." The man in black smiled again and said, "If I really wanted to kill you, do you think you would still be alive now? Then who are you?" Nye Tian took a deep breath and calmed down a lot before he asked again. "I'm the person you've been waiting for." As the man in black spoke, he took a few steps back and leaned against the wall. His body swayed a little as if he had suffered a serious injury. "You're the killer of the judge?" Nye Tian's eyes flickered violently as he exclaimed. Suddenly, the black-clothed man inexplicably laughed and said, "Where's the little fat cat beside you?" "I'm here." The little fat cat answered and appeared on Nye Tian's shoulder. It stared at the black-robed man with its sharp eyes and said, "I didn't expect you to be hiding in the heaven-forbidden prison all this time. But looking at your current appearance, I should have guessed correctly. You are indeed heavily injured." The man in black had been lurking in the celestial prison, but the fat cat hadn't noticed him at all. This made him a little angry. "You're right about me being injured." The man in black was not nervous at all. He seemed to be still smiling as he said, "Moreover, I did come for the Ring of Judgment. But most importantly, you've all guessed wrong." "What's the important point?" Nye Tian and Fat Cat were shocked at the same time and asked in unison. "Kill the Inquisitor." The black-clothed man's voice trembled slightly as he uttered these 3 words. Nye Tian couldn't help but frown. He immediately reacted and asked, "You mean you didn't kill the Grand Inquisitor? If I told you that the old man died of chi deviation, would you believe me?" The man in black snickered in disdain. That old man's lifespan was at its end, but he still forcefully used a forbidden technique to break through to the 6th level. Unfortunately, he was completely unable to control the backlash of the forbidden art and in the end, he died from chi deviation. Nye Tian was stunned and couldn't react for a long time. The man in black's explanation was far beyond his expectations, and he couldn't accept it at all. I admit I, Mu Qianlong, am not a good person. But I can't betray my master. The man in black's voice turned cold. I was looking for the old man because I wanted to know a secret about the Ring of Judgment. But he wouldn't tell me, so I left. But who would have thought that at that moment, the backlash from the forbidden technique exploded and he died of chi deviation. What did you say? Nie Tian was shocked again and asked in a low voice, You are the Inquisitor's disciple? Betray his master. Didn't this mean that this man in black, who called himself Mu Qianlong, was the Inquisitor's disciple? Nie Tian was once again flabbergasted by this sudden change. Aren't you curious why I can enter and leave the heaven-forbidden prison freely? Mu Qianlong smiled and asked calmly. Why? Nie Tian's gaze sharpened as he asked in a hurry. This was indeed a question he had, but he never asked it. The heaven-forbidden prison has Mu Jin's bloodline restriction. Apart from Mu Jin, the only people who can enter and leave the prison freely are those who have the same bloodline as her. Mu Qianlong smiled and said in a deep voice, You have the same bloodline as the spirit seat. Nie Tian immediately reacted and asked after a moment of hesitation, Who are you to the spirit seat? I am her twin brother. Mu Qianlong smiled again and slowly lifted the black robe, revealing a horrifying face. The face was extremely emaciated, as if there was no flesh or blood at all. It was just a piece of skin covering the bones of the face. However, the skin of the face was covered with black runes, which were somewhat similar to Nie Tian's divine demon inverse marks. However, this face did look similar to Mu Jin's. In addition, he could enter and leave the heaven-forbidden prison freely, which proved that he was related to the spirit seat, Mu Jin. However, whether the Inquisitor's words were true or not remained to be confirmed. You have been lurking around me for the Ring of Judgment, right? Nie Tian could tell that Mu Qianlong was severely injured and asked. Yes. Mu Qianlong did not hide it and said, I can make a deal with you. Once you establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, you can tell me a secret in the Ring of Judgment. I'll return your friend to you. What do you think? Ru Shi and the others were indeed captured by you. Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he said cold, How do I know that my friends are safe now? He hated being threatened, and he hated it even more when the other party used his friend as a bargaining chip. It seems that you care a lot about your friends. Mu Qianlong smiled and said, I can assure you that your friends are safe. If it wasn't for me, they would have been killed. Nie Tian frowned and his face turned cold when he heard Mu Qianlong's words. Ahem, don't be nervous. Mu Qianlong coughed as if he was severely injured and said, I don't know who those assassins were. They hid very well and I was injured. I didn't want to get involved with them, so I scared them away. How can I believe you? Nie Tian asked cold with a gloomy face, like a beast that was suppressing its anger. I'm sorry, but you have no choice but to believe me. Mu Qianlong was not afraid at all. It seemed that he was also a shrewd person. He said, I, Mu Qianlong. As he said that, he suddenly felt something. His face changed slightly and then he laughed. What are you laughing at? Nie Tian didn't know what was going on in the face of this sudden strange action. She's here. The corner of Mu Qianlong's mouth twitched and his smile was a little evil. She. Nie Tian was stunned at first, but then he reacted and said a name, Spirit Seat. Chapter 45-94. Spirit Seat Mu Jin. Nie Tian's eyes flashed with a strange light when he heard that Mu Jin was here. As soon as Mu Jin arrived, everything that Mu Qianlong said could be confirmed. Aren't you afraid? However, Mu Qianlong didn't have much of a reaction. He didn't look nervous at all. Instead, he looked strangely proud. This made Nie Tian feel strange, and he couldn't help but ask, Why should I be afraid? Mu Qianlong laughed and said in a sinister tone, Nie Tian, don't tell me you really believe Mu Jin. Do you really think she didn't notice anything about the old man's death? This. Nie Tian was shocked again and couldn't say anything for a while. Could it be that Mu Jin already knew that the Inquisitor wasn't killed, but died from chi deviation? If that was the case, then Nie Tian was still too young to trust Mu Jin so easily. But luckily, Mu Jin didn't do anything else. When the siblings meet, everything will be clear. As expected, after a while, Mu Jin's figure appeared in the heaven-forbidden prison like a ghost. "Little sister, long time no see." Mu Qianlan looked at the very familiar person in front of her, but there was a cold smile at the corner of her mouth, as if the other party was not her own sister, but her own enemy. "Mu Qianlan, it's really you." When Mu Jin saw her twin brother, a cold glint flashed in her beautiful eyes as she coldly snorted. Her words revealed that she already knew who the murderer was, but she didn't mention it to Nie Tian. "Since you already knew it was me, then you should have waited for me in the heaven-forbidden prison." Mu Qianlan chuckled as if he was laughing at Mu Jin's stupidity. "Why did you kill Master?" Mu Jin suppressed her anger and asked in a cold tone. "Little sister, you are still deceiving yourself at this time." Mu Qianlan frowned and shook his head with an embarrassed smile. "Can't you tell how the old man died? Or are you overestimating your brother and thinking that I can kill a sixth-stage immortal venerable?" Mu Jin's pupils suddenly constricted, and she seemed to have been struck by lightning. She was stunned on the spot and didn't react for a long time. Obviously, she already had a guess in her heart, but she didn't have the courage to admit it. Mu Qianlan's words confirmed her guess, and she couldn't accept it for a while. That old man's lifespan had clearly reached its end, but he still didn't want to die. In the end, he couldn't help but use a forbidden technique to forcefully break through to the 6th level. Seeing Mu Jin's reaction, Mu Qianlan couldn't help but laugh. Unfortunately, forbidden techniques aren't that easy to use. The old man couldn't suppress the backlash of the forbidden technique and died from chi deviation. But I didn't expect him to have such a deep hatred for me. Before he died, he even wanted to drag me down with him. If I hadn't been prepared, I'm afraid you would have lost 2 of your closest relatives. Shut up. Mu Jin suddenly raised her head and growled. Her eyes were incomparably fierce, like a man-eating beast. But Mu Qianlan wasn't afraid at all. He provoked, "What, do you want to kill your only relative in this world with your own hands? Mu Qianlan, Master has been good to you. He raised you, taught you immortal arts, and even appointed you as the next Inquisitor to be his successor. Why are you still not satisfied?" Mu Jin seemed to have gone mad as she growled in a low voice. "Is that so?" Mu Qianlan laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He said, "So, in your heart the old man is so revered. It's no wonder, the old man really does see you as his own. In your heart, he's like a teacher and a father. But in my heart, he's just a hypocrite through and through." Mu Qianlan. Mu Jin was completely enraged and roared, "You're biting the hand that feeds you. Don't tell me you want to completely destroy your image as an elder brother in my heart?" Mu Qianlan's pupils suddenly shrank. His face froze for a moment, then he fell into silence and didn't speak for a long time. So, in Mu Jin's heart, he still had the image of an elder brother. In the celestial prison, there was a deathly silence that made it hard for one to breathe. At this moment, as a bystander, Nie Tian couldn't tell who was right and who was wrong. He could see that Mu Jin respected the Inquisitor very much. But in Mu Qianlan's words, the Inquisitor had a completely different image. No one could tell what the truth was. "Why aren't you talking?" After a long time, Mu Jin calmed down and broke the silence again. "Just kill me." Mu Qianlan suddenly became calm. Looking at Mu Jin, there was a faint affection in his eyes. He said, "Everything is my fault. My hometown, the Inquisitor is dead, I shouldn't be alive anymore. Do it." Then, Mu Qianlan closed his eyes and looked like he was waiting to be killed, as if there was a sense of righteousness in it. "You didn't kill Master. I won't kill you," Mu Jin said coldly after a moment of silence. "He's already dead." What does it matter whether I killed him or not? Mu Qianlan smiled and said, There must be a murderer for his death. I can't tell others that he died because he cultivated a forbidden technique, right? You. Mu Jin's beautiful eyes trembled. She wanted to get angry, but she suppressed it. Little sister, I've killed many people and done many evil things in my life. Mu Qianlan became even more calm and indifferent. He smiled. To die in your hands is the best ending for me. Mu Jin's eyes were fixed on Mu Qianlan, and beads of sweat oozed from her palms. Finally, she took a step forward. It seems that I, as your brother, can't compare to that hypocritical old man. Mu Qianlan felt the oppressive murderous intent coming toward him. He twitched his lips and smiled helplessly in his heart. But none of that mattered anymore. Since that old man had always maintained the image of a good teacher and a kind father, then it wouldn't be a bad thing for his little sister to remember him like that, right? Unfortunately, he would no longer be able to hear his little sister call him Big Brother. Mu Jin's steps were extremely heavy, but she finally reached Mu Qianlan's side. She looked at her brother who had already closed his eyes. She finally made up her mind and raised her hand. At this moment, as long as her palm landed, Mu Qianlan would definitely die. My dear little sister, thank you for freeing me. Mu Qianlan murmured in his heart, waiting for the final moment to come. 2 lines of tears appeared in Mu Jin's eyes. She closed her eyes and the hand finally moved. The pressure from the celestial spiritual energy caused the entire prison to tremble. Wait! At this crucial moment, a voice was suddenly heard. Bang! Nie Tian's figure suddenly moved. Sword aura surged around him. He used his body to block the fatal palm for Mu Qianlan. Chapter 4595. Inside the celestial prison, just before Mu Jin's palm fell, Nie Tian's figure suddenly appeared and blocked the fatal blow for Mu Qianlan. Bang! With a muffled sound, the impact of immortal force and sword chi hit the surrounding walls, leaving dazzling sword marks. Pft! Nie Tian's figure retreated a few steps and then spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as paper. Mu Jin was the Feng Tian spirit seat and her cultivation had reached the earth rank immortal venerable. How could Nie Tian resist her full force palm? Fortunately, Nie Tian's martial body was strong. Although he was injured, it was not fatal. Nie Tian, what are you doing? Mu Jin suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Nie Tian, cold and growled. She never thought that Nie Tian would stand up to protect Mu Qianlan. Spirit seat, since Mu Qianlan didn't kill the Inquisitor, it's a bit inappropriate for you to kill him. Nie Tian was very calm and said indifferently. In fact, he didn't want to make a move, but Mu Qianlan had captured Mo Rushi and the others and hadn't told him their whereabouts. Moreover, he had a feeling that Mu Qianlan's words were more credible than the Inquisitor's. Mu Jin frowned and her pretty face was a bit gloomy, but her mood was a lot calmer. She looked at Mu Qianlan and said after a moment of silence, Mu Qianlan, I won't kill you today. But from today onwards, we have nothing to do with each other. I want you to leave the Feng Tian sect now and never come back. Mu Qianlan was also much calmer. He looked at Mu Jin with a strange light flashing in his eyes and said, I'm sorry, I can't leave the Feng Tian sect now. What else do you want? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes were filled with anger and cold. Not killing Mu Qianlan was already the biggest concession she could make. If he were to push his luck, he would be forcing her to make a move. I came to the Feng Tian sect for the Ring of Judgment. Mu Qianlan did not shy away and directly stated his purpose for coming to the Feng Tian sect. Mu Qianlan, you were expelled from the sect for cultivating a forbidden technique back then. Now, you've suddenly returned for the Ring of Judgment. Mu Jin sneered. Do you think you can inherit the position of an Inquisitor? I've never wanted to be an Inquisitor. Moreover, the forbidden technique I practiced back then wasn't as simple as you think. However, Mu Qianlan was extremely calm as he said indifferently, I just want to know a secret within the Ring of Judgment. As long as I figure out the secret, I will naturally leave. What if I insist that you leave now? Mu Jin's pretty face was cold. The silent, murderous intent surged again. Mu Qianlan was not afraid at all. Instead, he smiled and glanced at Nie Tian. This new Inquisitor's friend is still in my hands. Moreover, I feel that the Feng Tian sect needs me now. Mu Jin's eyes darkened as she glanced at Nie Tian cold. Only now did she understand why the latter risked his life to save the Inquisitor. However, her face was still cold as she said, "The Feng Tian sect does not need a traitor. Is that so?" Mu Qianlan smiled again and looked at Mu Jin strangely. "If I'm not wrong, the Feng Tian sect is in big trouble now. It has nothing to do with you." Mu Jin's eyes trembled as she replied cold. Indeed, the Feng Tian sect was currently in great danger. Mu Jin was originally busy dealing with the death of the Inquisitor, but in the past few days, people kept reporting bad news to her. Many immortals of the Feng Tian sect were ambushed on Fengming Mountain. There were even several ambushes that caused the Feng Tian sect to suffer heavy losses. Previously, Mu Jin already knew that Qin Qinglan and the others were ambushed, but she thought it was just an accident. In addition, the death of the Inquisitor was a great blow to her, so she did not take it seriously. It was not until more and more people were ambushed that she realized the seriousness of the matter. And today there was an ambush in the Feng Tian sect. Mu Jin personally led some people to the ambush site to check, but there was no trace of the ambush except for the corpses on the ground. It was no exaggeration to say that the Feng Tian sect was now in a state of panic, almost in danger of collapsing. The Feng Tian sect had stood on the Xianxi continent for countless years and had always been the dragon of cultivation in the Xianxi continent. Since the founding of the Feng Tian sect, such a terrible thing had never happened. Who on earth had extended their claws to the Feng Tian sect? Mu Jin and Yunting were already thinking that it was time to ask the Feng Tian immortal to come out of seclusion. "I've seen those men in black, but I just ignored them." Mu Qianlan smiled. Of course, he could see that Mu Jin's toughness was fake. He said, "If you let me stay and figure out the secret of the Ring of Judgment, I can help you find those people. Are you making a deal with me?" Mu Jin's beautiful eyes darkened slightly, and she asked coldly. "Sort of." Mu Qianlan was still smiling. "What do you want from the Ring of Judgment?" Mu Jin put away her killing intent. Obviously, she was a little tempted, but she was worried that Mu Qianlan had ulterior motives for the Feng Tian sect. "Don't worry, even if the Feng Tian sect kicks me out, I won't do anything to let the Feng Tian sect down." Mu Qianlan heard Mu Jin's worry and he said lightly, "The secret I want to know is only related to the forbidden technique that I'm practicing, and it won't threaten the Feng Tian sect." Mu Jin stared at Mu Qianlan deeply, and after a long time, she said, "Then how can I believe that you have the ability to find the men in black? Bring me a corpse that was killed by the men in black, and I will prove my ability to you." Mu Qianlan nodded and said, "Okay." Mu Jin hesitated for a moment, but she still nodded, and then her figure moved and disappeared directly. "Thank you for just now." After Mu Jin left, Mu Qianlan looked at Nie Tian and nodded to thank him. No matter what purpose Nie Tian had, he had saved his life after all, and deserved to be thanked. "I don't need your thanks, I need you to let go of my friends." Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he said directly, "Don't worry, your friends are in the place I arranged, they are 100% safe." Mu Qianlan looked calm and said, "As long as you let me know the secret, I will definitely let go of your friends. What if I can't establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment?" Nie Tian furrowed his brows and asked in a deep voice. The secret that Mu Qianlan wanted to know was in the Ring of Judgment, but Nie Tian had been unable to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, which made him very worried. Could it be that there was really something wrong with his bloodline, so it was not recognized by the Ring of Judgment? Since the old thing chose you, there must be a reason. Mu Qianlan was quite confident and he said with a faint smile, The old thing is very hypocritical, but he still has a good eye for people. Nie Tian's face darkened, and he did not speak. And you saved my life. Even if you can't help me, I will still let go of your friends. Mu Qianlan's mouth twitched, and he added, I, Mu Qianlan, am not a good person, but I am not a villain who returns kindness with enmity. Chapter 4596. He was not a good person, but he was definitely not a villain. Mu Qianlan's words were very sincere, and Nie Tian could not help but change his opinion of him. Moreover, Nie Tian was a little curious. Mu Qianlan had said more than once that he was not a good person. Although he did not show any obvious pain, he could hear the guilt in his words. What exactly did he do to have this kind of mentality? Since Mu Qianlan was unwilling to let them go, Nie Tian temporarily gave up. Moreover, the Fengtian sect was not safe now. It might not be a good thing to let Mo Rushi and the others out. Next, Mu Qianlan and Nie Tian exchanged some questions about martial arts and immortal Tao, and they both benefited from it. Not long after, Mu Jin returned with a corpse. This corpse was killed by the man in black. When I arrived, he was still breathing, but unfortunately, he did not survive. Mu Jin pointed at the corpse on the ground and said solemnly, Very good. Mu Qianlan smiled, but his body was seriously injured, and he could not help but cough. Are you seriously injured? Mu Jin frowned and asked coldly. I'm fine. Mu Qianlan smiled, but his expression was very ugly. Don't move first. Mu Jin's eyes narrowed, and then she injected a stream of immortal energy into Mu Qianlan. Mu Qianlan did not refuse, and after a while, his expression slightly improved. Your body. Mu Jin took a deep breath and seemed to notice something. Just as she was about to speak, she was interrupted by Mu Qianlan with a wave of his hand. It's nothing. Mu Qianlan smiled faintly, and did not look at Mu Jin's reaction. Instead, he took a step forward and stared at the corpse on the ground. Mu Jin did not know what Mu Qianlan was going to do, so she quietly watched from the side, not daring to disturb him. But then, a stream of immortal energy surged from Mu Qianlan's fingertips, condensed into an immortal energy blade, and directly fell on the corpse's neck. What are you doing? When Mu Jin saw this, his expression could not help but change as he shouted in a low voice. Don't worry, it's just a corpse. As Mu Qianlan spoke, he cut off the head of the corpse and said, Use his head to find the murderer. I think he won't mind. Mu Jin's eyes were gloomy. She was a little angry, but she still endured it. At this moment, Mu Qianlan held the head that was still dripping blood in one hand and drew an immortal talisman on the forehead with the other. A moment later, a strange scene occurred. The head seemed to have come to life and opened its eyes. When Mu Jin saw this, her eyes could not help but tremble. She could not hide the surprise in her eyes. Even though she was the noble Fengtian spirit seat and had seen countless strange things, she couldn't help but be shocked at this moment. It seemed that this was the forbidden immortal technique that Mu Qianlan had cultivated in the past. Back then, Mu Qianlan was known as the #1 genius of Fengtian spirit seat. At a young age, he reached the 5th stage of immortal supremacy and was secretly selected to be the next inquisitor. Unfortunately, Mu Qianlan cultivated the forbidden immortal technique on his own and was eventually expelled from the Fengtian sect. For a long time, Mu Jin could not understand why Mu Qianlan, who originally had a bright future, would cultivate the forbidden immortal technique. Until now, she still could not understand. Then, the immortal power in Mu Qianlan's palm surged and turned into an immortal power vortex in the air, lingering around the head. Instantly, images began to appear in the immortal power vortex. It was everything that the owner of the head saw before he died. Take a good look. What was the last image he saw? Mu Qianlan nodded and looked at Mu Jin. Mu Jin was very focused and stared at the immortal power vortex. Above the vortex, a group of people in black appeared. Their movements were extremely fast like ghosts. They turned into several black rays in the void, and then began a massacre. Did you see it clearly? When the image on the vortex disappeared, Mu Qianlan's face was slightly pale and he asked, I want to see it again. Mu Jin frowned and said coldly, Okay. Using the forbidden technique obviously consumed a lot of Mu Qianlan's energy, but he still nodded. The second time, Mu Jin was more focused, but she still did not find anything unusual. She only saw a group of strange people in black killing a group of Fengtian sect disciples. But the group of people in black were all covered in black robes, so she could not see any valuable clues. Look again. Mu Jin's pretty face was gloomy and she said again. Although Mu Qianlan's face was already very ugly, he nodded again. Then, Mu Jin looked at it 3 more times. At the last time, Mu Qianlan's face was pale, and he could not hold on any longer. Spirit seat, if you really can't see anything, just forget it. Nie Tian could not stand it anymore and could not help but say. However, Mu Jin seemed to have discovered something. She fell into deep thought and did not speak for a long time. What did you find? Mu Qianlan could not help but ask when he saw that Mu Jin did not speak for a long time. The way the people in black killed was using an extremely evil iron chain. Mu Jin finally said, I noticed that there was an immortal talisman on the back of one of the men in black's palm. It seemed to be some kind of curse. Curse? Mu Qianlan frowned and asked, What kind of curse? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes trembled slightly, and she drew an extremely strange pattern on her palm. It looked like a coffin and was very evil. Mu Qianlan looked at the curse drawn by Mu Jin and seemed to think of something. He could not help but ponder. You know this curse? Mu Jin's expression changed and she asked anxiously. Mu Qianlan did not speak and kept thinking. If I'm not wrong, this curse should be called the nether birth coffin. After a long time, Mu Qianlan finally said in a deep voice, Nether birth coffin? Mu Jin was puzzled and did not know what it was. The nether birth coffin is an extremely terrifying evil curse. Mu Qianlan's eyes narrowed and he said, Those who are afflicted with the nether birth coffin will develop a talisman called the nether birth coffin in their bodies. Their souls will be imprisoned in the nether birth coffin, but they can maintain the actions of a normal person and only listen to the orders of the person who cast the curse. Moreover, the nether birth coffin can greatly increase the cultivation of the person afflicted with the curse, but the price is the annihilation of the person afflicted with the curse. More importantly, the nether birth coffin needs the soul of a child of 3 as a guide to form the curse. Child of 3? Nie Tian and Mu Jin were stunned and asked in unison. A child born on a day in a year cannot be older than 6 years old. Mu Qianlan frowned and explained. This. Nie Tian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air, and was momentarily speechless. He did not expect the nether birth coffin to be so evil. Not only could it imprison a person's soul, but it also used the soul of a child as a guide. Such a heartless method showed how ruthless and cruel the person who cast the curse was. Why are you so familiar with the nether birth coffin? At this moment, Mu Jin's expression darkened and she asked in a cold tone. Mu Qianlan's pupils couldn't help but constrict. Even though he was trying his best to maintain his composure, he still couldn't conceal the panic in his heart. He composed himself and finally said, Because I once cultivated the netherbirth coffin. Chapter 4597. Mu Qianlan had cultivated the netherbirth coffin before? Nie Tian and Mu Jin were stunned at the same time, and their expressions changed drastically. They had never imagined that Mu Qianlan had actually cultivated such a sinister evil art like the nether birth coffin. Mu Qianlan's expression was gloomy, but he could not conceal the raging waves in his heart. The appearance of the nether birth coffin made him recall a past that he was unwilling to face in this life. Back then, in order to cultivate the nether birth coffin, he had killed hundreds of children of 3. Even though he was unwilling to recall these things later on, and even used a special method to seal his memories, he could not stop the nightmares that would suddenly appear every night. The miserable wails of those children before they died were like a curse that he couldn't get rid of, lingering around his ears like a sharp knife that kept cutting his heart. After a long time, Mu-Jin finally spoke and asked in a deep voice, "Why did you cultivate the nether birth coffin?" The nether birth coffin used the children of 3 as soul guides to imprison the souls of others. It could be said to be extremely devoid of humanity. She had long known that Mu Qianlan cultivated the immortal sex forbidden skill, but she did not expect him to cultivate such a cruel forbidden skill. I didn't want to mention these things, but I have to say it now. Suddenly, Mu Qianlan calmed down, and his gaze became indifferent. He said word by word, "I was instructed to cultivate all the forbidden skills." Instructed? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes trembled, and she shouted in a low voice, "Who?" "Our master, Sky Beacon Inquisitor Du Wui." Mu Qianlan suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were fierce and resentful as he said a name. "Master Du Wui." Mu Qianlan's words were like thunder from the 9 heavens that exploded in Mu Jin's mind, causing her to tremble. She was stunned for a moment, and then she shouted in a low voice, "Impossible, you're lying." However, Mu Qianlan was extremely calm, and he even laughed strangely. "Do you still trust Du Wui so much at a time like this?" Mu Jin suddenly sensed the hatred in Mu Qianlan's eyes, and she was stunned and speechless. Could it be, as Mu Qianlan had said, that her most respected master had always been a hypocrite? "Why do you think I suddenly cultivated the forbidden skill?" Mu Qianlan's eyes were filled with killing intent, as if recalling many past events. He said, "I originally had a bright future, but because of a lie, I fell into the abyss. For so many years, I never explained anything, even though I had to bear all the curses. I always remembered that he was my master because he was my Qianlan Tian. He was the one who raised and taught me. Mu Qianlan Master, Qianlan Tianwan." As he finished speaking, Mu Qianlan was almost howling, and his eyes had unknowingly become slightly moist. Mu Jin was dumbfounded, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. She could not believe that the usually calm and kind old man was the demon-like existence that Mu Qianlan had mentioned. Could it be that Du Wui had always been pretending? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Mu Qianlan must be lying? A voice kept reminding her in her mind. But at the same time, another voice was clamoring. Why did he lie? Back then, what reason did he have to practice the forbidden skill? The two voices argued and refused to give in to each other. It almost made Mu Jin's brain explode. "I don't want to argue about the truth." Mu Qianlan was unusually calm. He waited for Mu Jin to calm down before saying, "I just want to tell you that the reappearance of the nether birth coffin reminded me of someone." "Who?" Mu Jin's eyes narrowed as she asked. "Genie Feng." Mu Qianlan said a name in a deep voice. Mu Jin's calm expression changed again when she heard this name. She was shocked. She was too familiar with this name. It was her eldest senior brother, Genie Feng, the first direct disciple of Sky Beacon Inquisitor Du Wui. He used to be the #1 person in the Fengtian sect, and was known as the Wonder of Sky Beacon. Once upon a time, Mu Qianlan was known as the #1 genius in Sky Beacon, but his talent was nothing compared to Genie Feng's. Genie Feng was a 4th stage Immortal Lord before the age of 20, a 5th stage Immortal Venerable at 36, and a Heaven stage Immortal Venerable before the age of 50. Not only was Genie Feng famous in the Fengtian sect, but he was also known as the #1 person in the entire Immortal Qi continent in 1,000 years. Many senior immortals had asserted that Genie Feng would break the awkward situation of the Immortal Qi continent not having a 6th stage Immortal Venerable for thousands of years. He might even achieve this feat before the age of 100. Back then, Genie Feng's glory was unparalleled. At that time, Mu Qianlan and Mu Jin were only in their 20s. They were considered newcomers who had just stepped into the immortal sect and could only look up to Genie Feng. Genie Feng was a heaven stage immortal venerable at such a young age. His true battle strength had already surpassed the Fengtian Immortal and the 3 sky beacon towers. At that time, the Fengtian Immortal had the intention to retire and wanted Genie Feng to be the next Fengtian Immortal. However, Genie Feng was very humble and thought that he was too young to bear the name of the Fengtian Immortal. When the Fengtian Immortal saw Genie Feng's insistence, he gave up and thought that it might not be a bad thing to wait for Genie Feng to grow older before taking over the Fengtian Immortal position. However, an accident happened that ruined Genie Feng's future and the Fengtian sect's hope. When Genie Feng was carrying out a secret mission, he was infected by evil energy and his temperament changed drastically. He became extremely violent and even killed many disciples of the Fengtian sect when he lost his mind. In the end, the Fengtian Immortal and the 3 sky beacon towers joined hands and killed Genie Feng. After Genie Feng's death, Mu Qianlan slowly emerged and gained the title of Sky Beacon Tower's #1 genius. Meanwhile, Mu Jin's expression couldn't help but change, and she was puzzled in her heart. Why would Mu Qianlan suddenly mention Genie Feng? She couldn't help but say with surprise, could it be that eldest senior brother was struck by the Netherbirth's coffin all those years ago? Genie Feng was infected by evil energy back then, causing his temperament to change drastically. It was as if he was a completely different person. Recalling all this, Mu Jin could not help but feel that Genie Feng seemed to be controlled by someone, which was why he suddenly became so violent. The Netherbirth coffin could imprison a person's soul and turn them into a walking corpse. No. Mu Qianlan shook his head and paused for a moment before taking a deep breath. Back then, Genie Feng's temperament changed drastically and he was defeated by the Fengtian Immortal and the 3 sky beacon towers. However, he did not die after being defeated. Eldest senior brother did not die. Mu Jin's expression changed again. Impossible. After eldest senior brother was defeated, the Immortal Lord ordered his body to be burned in public. He can't still be alive. Genie Feng's body was indeed burned. However, before his body was burned, his soul was already extracted by someone using a special technique. Mu Qianlan's eyes narrowed slightly as he said in a deep voice. This. Mu Jin immediately took a deep breath and was speechless for a moment. Chapter 45-98. When Ye Tian saw that the purple-robed woman had actually used the power of her bloodline, he could not help but frown and his face darkened. Initially, he did not want to pay attention to the purple-clothed woman, but since she was forcing him, he had no choice but to teach her a lesson. Kill! At this moment, the purple-robed woman shouted. Her sword slashed down, and the shadow of the sword was sharp and murderous. Even the void seemed to be frozen as it pressed towards Nye Tian. You have no sense of propriety. In the face of the purple-clothed woman's all-out bloodline attack, Nye Tianling shouted coldly. The sword aura around him suddenly erupted, and suddenly, the momentum of a stormy wave swept everything. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the violent sword will smash the sword shadows in the void, and at the same time, the woman in purple was forced to retreat. The purple-dressed lady was not weak. She had reached the first stage of Heaven Enlightenment realm. With the help of her bloodline power, she could fight against a low-level sky martial divine ancestor. Unfortunately, she ran into Nye Tian, who was even more abnormal. Pft! The purple-clothed woman retreated a few hundred meters before she was able to stabilize herself. She was just about to speak when her body trembled, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. You are too weak. You are not worthy of my sword. Nye Tian did not give the purple-clothed woman any face as he spoke in a cold tone. Since the purple-clothed woman was the daughter of the Ice Capital's ruler, her status was naturally extremely noble. She was probably used to being arrogant and willful, thinking that everyone had to give in to her. The woman in purple was provoked by Nye Tian, and her blood immediately rushed to her head. She was just about to speak, but she almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Just as Nye Tian had thought, she was the princess of the ice capital. Normally, anyone who saw her would treat her with respect and would pamper and protect her. Today, in front of Nye Tian, she was looked down upon. How could she tolerate this? "You're young, but you talk big." Just at this moment, a cold laughter drifted over, followed by a surge of killing intent, like a ferocious tiger descending from the mountains, directly pouncing towards Nye Tian. Sensing the terrifying pressure, Nye Tian's expression changed abruptly as he retreated rapidly. At the same time, a sharp sword chi shot out to block the killing intent. Nye Tian steadied himself. He saw a white-robed young man's aura descending. He stood beside the purple-robed woman like a mountain. "Big brother boy!" The purple-clad woman called out in delight when she saw the white-clad young man. "Inger, you step back first." The young man in white smiled warmly and signaled Bing Inger to step aside. "Yes." Bing Inger nodded obediently. She raised her head and looked at Nye Tian with an arrogant attitude, as if she was saying, "Little brat, you're dead." Nye Tian looked at the young man in white and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This white-robed young man looked older than Bing Inger, but his aura was much stronger. Apparently, he was a peerless genius. "Friend, you're not a member of the Abyss Ghost race. Why are you here?" The young man in white called Bo-E coldly asked while looking at Nye Tian. "I've already told this lady in purple. I don't want to repeat myself." Nye Tian's mouth twitched as if he was trying to provoke Bo-E. "Big brother boy, they've sneaked in with evil intentions." Bing Inger stared at Nye Tian and shouted. Bo-E frowned. The murderous aura on his face intensified. "Make your move." Nye Tian could see that Bo-E was a steady person, so he couldn't help but smile faintly and provoke him again. He could see that this man's strength wasn't ordinary, so he wanted to force him to make a move. "As you wish." Bo-E was young after all. Even if he was steady, he couldn't help but be enraged by Nye Tian's provocation. He let out a low roar and stepped forward. A terrifying aura was released. It was the extremely powerful spear intent. Seeing this, Nye Tian couldn't help but reveal a smile. So this Bo-E was a spear user. No wonder his aura was so domineering. 8 desolates. Then, Bo-E shouted coldly and slapped his palm horizontally. His aura shook the sky and pressed down on Nye Tian. He didn't show his spear. It was obvious that he was also a very conceited person. "Good move." Nye Tian smiled faintly. The sword intent around his body moved and his sword slashed out. Boom! The two forces collided and the void shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Nye Tian's body shook a little. He was forced to take a step back. On the other hand, Bo-E was like an old tree that didn't move an inch. "You are a sword user, yet you want to compete with me in power. Are you looking down on me?" Bo-E won a little, but he didn't look happy at all. Instead, he said coldly, "Blade user, spear user, and sword user." The so-called blade was forceful, while the sword was sharp. On the other hand, the spear was both forceful and sharp. It was sharper than the blade, more forceful than the sword. In other words, the forcefulness was weaker than the blade, and the sharpness was weaker than the sword. Nye Tian didn't dodge at all. He directly clashed with Bo-E. Obviously, he didn't care about the difference between the sword intent and the spear intent. From Bo-Yi's point of view, Nye Tian was looking down on him. "Even though I'm a swordsman, my sword intent is much more powerful than the saber intent of an ordinary saber user. You're able to surpass me in terms of power with just your spear intent. It's really not easy." Nye Tian smiled faintly and said in an extremely sincere manner. However, his words became even more disdainful in Bo-Yi's ears. "Really?" Bo-Yi's face turned cold. The anger in his eyes rose. At the same time, the spear intent around his body moved like a dragon, stirring up thousands of zhang in the void. This guy is so powerful. Second dog Jean, who was watching from the side, felt Bo Yi's spear intent and couldn't help but praise. Although he was young and not a spear user, he could still feel Bo Yi's power. Brother Bo Yi is so strong. Bing Yinger was also surprised. She couldn't help but say, "Very good." Nie Tian felt the surge of Bo Yi's spear intent. Not only was he not angry, but he also smiled with blazing eyes. Arrogant! Bo Yi was completely enraged by Nie Tian's smile. He roared and moved instantly. Like a long spear, he pressed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian wasn't afraid at all. He stomped his feet and his figure became like a sword, fighting against Bo Yi. Bang! The spear and the sword collided. It was like metal and stone colliding, and an explosive sound erupted. Boom! Immediately, the spear intent and the sword intent exploded in the void, rushing in all directions. They were like giant devouring beasts sweeping the field. In the next moment, Nie Tian and Bo Yi's figures retreated at the same time, and then stabilized themselves almost at the same time. However, the difference was that Nie Tian had retreated 100 meters, while Bo Yi had only retreated a few dozen meters. Without a doubt, Bo Yi had won the second clash. However, there was no joy on Bo Yi's face. Instead, he stared at Nie Tian with a face full of anger. In the 2 consecutive clashes between the spear and sword intents, he had only repelled Nie Tian. To him, this was a failure. If a sword user couldn't injure his opponent in a direct confrontation, it would be a disgrace to Bo Yi. Again, Bo Yi's face was cold and murderous. This time, he was really angry. That's what I was thinking. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He wanted Bo Yi to be angry, because he wanted to see how strong this spear user was. Chapter 45-99. Mu Qianlan was excited at the thought of checking the spirit elephant seal. He couldn't wait to go to the judgment hall. Mu Jin, on the other hand, was calm. She thought about it and nodded in agreement. The 3 of them left the celestial prison and headed to the judgment hall. The judgment hall was solemn as usual. However, the lifeless atmosphere made the entire hall feel like it was in ruins. Mu Jin and the other 2 came out of the main hall and walked towards it. The mysterious heaven guard guarding outside the main hall naturally didn't dare to stop Mu Jin and respectfully welcomed her in. Mu Jin entered the main hall and saw that the judgment seat was empty from afar. Her heart couldn't help but sink and a bad premonition surged in her heart. Where's the body? Mu Qianlan noticed it too. He went to the judgment seat, but the Inquisitor's body was nowhere to be seen. Nie Tian frowned. Was there really something wrong with the Inquisitor's body? Guards! Mu Jin's face turned cold and she bellowed. Yes, sir. 2 mysterious heavenly guards appeared and landed on the ground. Where's the Inquisitor's body? Mu Jin asked coldly. This. The 2 mysterious heavenly guards looked at the judgment seat in confusion, not knowing what was going on. They were ordered to guard the judgment hall and not allow anyone to enter. They did not allow anyone to enter, so why was the Inquisitor's body gone? Who else came to the judgment hall besides me? Mu Jin didn't waste time talking to the 2 mysterious heavenly guards and asked coldly, replying to the spirit seat. One of the guards was relatively calm, but his forehead was covered in sweat and his voice was trembling. He said, "The judgment hall is heavily guarded. Other than Lord Spirit Seat and Lord Edge Seat, we didn't let anyone enter." That means there was another peak constellation that came here. Mu Jin's eyes trembled. You 2, go and invite the Edge Seat. Yes. The 2 did not dare to disobey. They immediately disappeared. Mu Jin's pretty face was incomparably cold. Her entire person gave off a gloomy feeling that no one should approach her. At this time, the balance in her heart had begun to lean towards Mu Qianlan. The body of Du Wui, the Inquisitor, had disappeared, which was obviously strange. But Mu Jin did not think that it was Edge Constellation Yunting who was up to no good. Although Yunting usually didn't get along with the Inquisitor and her, he was not an evil person. It was impossible for him to do anything that would harm the Fengtian sect. If other people were excluded, then the only possibility was the corpse itself. In this way, there was no doubt that Mu Qianlan's words were confirmed. If Du Wei is not dead, what is he plotting? Mu Qianlan muttered, why did he give the Ring of Judgment to Nie Tian? Spirit Throne, what happened? At this time Yunting arrived. Before he even reached the main hall, his rough voice was already heard, and it was filled with undisguised urgency. See for yourself. Mu Jin glanced at the seat of judgment and said coldly, where's the Inquisitor's body? Yunting was stunned at first, but he immediately reacted and roared. Mu Jin's pretty face was gloomy and she did not speak. Spirit Throne, what is going on? Yunting saw that Mu Jin did not speak and said loudly, the Inquisitor is the only sixth realm immortal venerable in the Fengtian sect for thousands of years. No one is allowed to desecrate his body. Mu Qianlan frowned and couldn't help but sneer in his heart. It seemed that Du Wei's fake loyalty had deceived many people. We just arrived. The Inquisitor's body disappeared before we arrived. Mu Jin frowned and said coldly, who is this person? Yunting's face darkened. He then noticed Mu Qianlan, then looked at Nie Tian and frowned. Why is Nie Tian here? He really wanted to figure out what was going on. In the past few days, too many things had happened in the Fengtian sect. First, the Inquisitor was killed, then the sect disciples were slaughtered one after another at the entrance of the sect. Now, even the Inquisitor's body had disappeared. In an instant, the originally powerful and glorious Fengtian sect was showing signs of collapse. As the leader of the Sky Beacon Peak, Yunting had to bear a huge responsibility and was naturally anxious. What's wrong? Mu Qianlan's mouth twitched. He looked at Yunting strangely and said, it's been so many years. Brother Yunting doesn't recognize an old friend? Yunting could not see Mu Qianlan's face, but he recognized the voice. His face changed and he said in shock, you are Mu Qianlan. It's rare that you still remember my voice. Mu Qianlan laughed and was very indifferent. Before he left the Fengtian sect, he was familiar with Yunting. Both of them were young talents in the Fengtian sect. It was just that Yunting's talent was weaker than his, so his reputation was lower. Traitor, why are you following me back to the sect? Yunting's eyes trembled. He suddenly reacted and roared. The immortal power in his body exploded. The terrifying power was like a landslide and a tsunami covering the sky and earth. Calm down. But at this time, Mu Jin shouted and took a step forward. He actually suppressed Yunting's power. Under the huge impact, Yunting could not help but take a few steps back. He stabilized himself and looked at Mu Jin in shock. He did not think that Mu Jin would actually stop him. He did not think that Mu Jin's power would be so strong that it could directly suppress him. Before this, he always thought that he and Mu Jin were on par, or even slightly stronger. But now, the truth slapped him hard in the face. Brother Yun, even if I was expelled from the Fengtian sect, I am not the Fengtian sect's enemy. Why are you so angry? Mu Qianlan also smiled and said lightly, bastard. Yunting was furious and shouted, you violated the sect's rules, practiced forbidden skills, and harmed the innocent. Today, I will do justice on behalf of the heavens and execute you on the spot. On the spot? Mu Qianlan smiled and said, then you have to ask if your spirit seed agrees. You. Yunting's face darkened. He immediately looked at the gloomy Mu Jin and was speechless. Spirit Seat Feng, calm down first. Mu Jin looked at Yunting and said, we'll talk about Mu Qianlan later. The most important thing now is to deal with the Inquisitor and the assassin in black. Why is he here? Yunting calmed down a little and pointed at Mu Qianlan and asked in a low voice. Mu Jin's pretty face darkened. She paused and said, I asked him to help. What? Yunting's eyes widened in anger. He could not believe his ears and directly let out a strange cry. How could he believe that Mu Jin would actually ask a traitor to help? I suspect that the black-clothed men's technique is a forbidden immortal sect technique, so I asked Mu Qianlan to come take a look. Mu Jin responded with a cold face. Yunting frowned and was about to say something when he saw two mysterious heavenly guards barge into the hall. Spirit Seat Lord, something bad has happened. The black-clothed men have appeared again. Another sect disciple has been killed. The two mysterious heavenly guards were panic-stricken and said anxiously. Chapter 4600. In the Judgment Hall. What? Mu Jin and Yunting's expressions changed at the same time when they heard that the black-clothed man had reappeared and that the sect's disciples had been killed again. Bring us there. Without waiting for the two Xiantian guards to answer, Mu Qianlan shouted. Yes. The two mysterious heavenly guards didn't know Mu Qianlan, but they could feel the terrible power from the latter and couldn't help but nod in agreement. Mu Jin and the rest soon arrived at a secluded place in the inner sect of the Fengtian sect, the Heart Valley. These bastards! How dare they kill their way into the Heart Valley? Yunting was furious as he looked at the corpses on the ground. The Heart Valley was one of the few cultivation treasures in the inner sect of the Fengtian sect. Usually, only the most outstanding of the inner sect disciples were qualified to enter the Heart Valley to cultivate. Most of the outer sect disciples of the Fengtian sect did not even know where the Heart Valley was. Previously, the black-robed men had only killed people in the outer sect. This time, they had actually killed their way into the inner sect. Furthermore, they had attacked the extremely important Heart Valley. How could Yunting not be angry? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes were filled with coldness. It was obvious that she was also very angry, but she was still very calm. She looked at Mu Qianlan and asked, Can you see anything? These corpses had just been killed. Based on Mu Qianlan's experience, he should be able to see some clues. Mu Qianlan squatted down, as if he did not hear Mu Jin's words. He was completely focused on one of the corpses on the ground, like an artist engrossed in a perfect work of art. Yunting wanted to say something but was stopped by Mu Jin. After a long time, Mu Qianlan stood up but did not say a word. What did you find? Mu Jin's heart sank when she saw that Mu Qianlan was not speaking. The opponent is stronger than I thought. Mu Qianlan took a deep breath and said, I've observed them carefully. There's still a lingering netherworld aura on their bodies. They did die under the King of Hell's coffin. However, the nether-een energy of the person who attacked seems to be somewhat different. It's even stronger than the nether-een energy I cultivate. You mean to say that the Yama King's coffin in them is stronger? Mu Jin frowned slightly as she asked. You could say that. Mu Qianlan nodded and said, This means that the person behind them is very powerful. What netherworld king's coffin? What are you talking about? Yunting was at a loss. He had no idea what the two of them were talking about. Mu Jin stared at Yunting. She was obviously hesitant about whether or not she should tell him about the Yama King's coffin. After all, before the matter was fully investigated, everyone was a suspect. What if Yunting was also one of them? Although Brother Yunting is a little reckless, he would never betray the Fengtian sect. Mu Qianlan saw Mu Jin's hesitation and smiled. He then told her about the King of Hell's coffin. However, he only mentioned Jin Feng and did not mention anything about Du Wui. Jin Feng is not dead? Yunting was shocked and shook his head. That's impossible. When Jin Feng was at his peak, Yunting was still very young. However, Jin Feng was too famous. Almost all the disciples of the Fengtian sect worshipped him. Yunting also respected Jin Feng and regarded him as a role model. At that time, Jin Feng's death made him depressed for a period of time. Now, Mu Qianlan suddenly told him that Jin Feng was not dead and had even practiced the forbidden skill. How could he believe it? So many people died in the Heart and Mind Valley. This is a big blow to the Fengtian sect. Mu Qianlan did not care about Yunting's reaction. He let out a long sigh. Those who could enter the Heart and Mind Valley to practice were all inner disciples of the Fengtian sect. Each of them was the future pillar of the sect. Their deaths had a great impact on the future of the Fengtian sect. What is that place? At this time, Nie Tian suddenly pointed to a slightly tilted mountain in the distance and asked, "It's Ing Wu Feng." Mu Jin responded faintly. Then, she thought of something and her pretty face suddenly sank. She said in horror, "Oh no!" As soon as she finished speaking, her figure moved, and like a ray of light, she flew straight towards Ing Wu Peak. "Those men in black, will they attack Ing Wu Feng?" Yunting also reacted. His heart suddenly sank. "Quick, follow them!" Mu Qianlan shouted. He wanted to directly chase after them, but he felt a little weak. His blood rushed to his head, and he actually spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. Yunting glanced at Mu Qianlan and frowned. He did not say anything and continued to chase after them. "Are you okay?" Nie Tian held Mu Qianlan. He could feel that the latter's breath was a little unstable. He could not help but feel a little worried. "I'm fine." Mu Qianlan took a deep breath and tried his best to stabilize his breath. He said, "Quick, take me to have a look." Nie Tian nodded. The star soul wings appeared on his back, and he chased after them with Mu Qianlan. Ing Wu Feng. The peak was like an inverted bell, standing majestically and slanting into the sky. For ordinary disciples of the Fengtian sect, Ing Wu Feng was a forbidden place. In fact, the majority of disciples did not even know of its existence. Ing Wu Feng was one of the few core places of the Fengtian sect. The immortal force in it was incomparably dense, far surpassing other places. Cultivating in Ing Wu Feng would be several times more beneficial than cultivating in the outside world. Because of this, Ing Wu Feng was only open to the genius disciples of the Fengtian sect. Every year, the Fengtian sect would hold an Immortal Tao competition. Only the top 10 disciples in the competition were qualified to enter Ing Wu Feng. Moreover, the elders of the Fengtian sect knew that those who could enter Ing Wu Feng would become the higher-ups of the Fengtian sect in the future. At the very least, they would be the captain of the mysterious Heaven Guards. It was no exaggeration to say that Ing Wu Feng represented the future of the Fengtian sect to a certain extent. If the men in black made a move on Ing Wu Feng, it would really be enough to hurt the Fengtian sect. That was why Mu Jin was so nervous when she saw Ing Wu Feng. At this moment, at the peak of Ing Wu Feng, dozens of young immortals were sitting cross-legged with immortal palaces hovering above their heads, absorbing immortal force to their heart's content. They were completely unaware that there were more than 10 pairs of ferocious eyes staring at them like ferocious wolves. More than 10 men in black moved like ghosts and silently approached the immortals in the immortal field. Swoosh! At this moment, one of the men in black made a move. He struck out with his palm, and immortal force condensed into a fatal blade that attacked one of the young immortals. A fatal moment. The difference between life and death. Just as the immortal blade was about to land, a vigorous immortal force surged and instantly destroyed the immortal blade. The black-clothed man was a little surprised. He suddenly raised his head and saw a beautiful woman staring at him with a pair of cold, murderous eyes. This female immortal was none other than Mu Jin, the spirit throne of Fengtian. Fortunately, Nie Tian had reminded her, so she could arrive in time. Finally, she met the men in black head-on. She wanted to see just what was the background of these black-robed men. Chapter 4601. On Ing Wu Peak, Mu Jin, the spirit throne of Sky Beacon, faced the mysterious assassin for the first time. The anger, hatred, and killing intent that she had been suppressing for a long time exploded. The assassin's dark eyes flickered with a strange cold light as he faced the enraged Mu Jin. He was emotionless and fearless. Swoosh! Suddenly, the black-clothed man's figure moved like a ray of light, and he moved as fast as lightning. His entire body seemed to have fused with space itself, and he transformed into a lethal blade that attacked Mu Jin. Mu Jin frowned slightly, and her pretty face turned cold. Celestial force erupted from her body, and it was as if it was going to destroy everything. Bang! Bang! Two muffled sounds came from the void. Under the surging celestial force, the assassin was engulfed by the celestial force before he could react. Not only did he not leave his corpse behind, the other assassins were not afraid at all. Not only did they not retreat, but they also pounced on Mu Jin. Boom! More than a dozen assassins moved at the same time, and their auras merged into one, stirring up waves in the void. They forced Mu Jin to take a few steps back. Mu Jin steadied herself, and her pretty face darkened. She did not expect these black-robed men to be so strong. The dozen assassins were all fourth-stage celestial lords, and a few of them were even heaven-stage celestial lord. Mu Jin suddenly remembered that Mu Qianlan once said that the strength of those who were in the King of Hell's coffin would skyrocket. It seems that you are all controlled by the King of Hell's coffin. Mu Jin's pretty face turned cold. She raised her hand, and a thin long sword appeared in her palm. The sharp chi cut through the sky. Kill! At this moment, one of the assassins shouted in a low and hoarse voice. Yin chi erupted from his body, and he slapped his palm. A huge Yin ghost claw appeared in the sky, and its majestic aura was no weaker than a fifth-stage celestial venerable. It was going to attack Mu Jin. Mu Jin frowned. She raised the long sword in her hand, and sword chi gushed out. The sharp chi tore through everything and instantly broke the ghost claw. However, the black-clothed man did not retreat. Instead, he advanced and rushed over. "You're courting death!" Mu Jin shouted, and her eyes filled with killing intent. Then, she slashed with her sword. "Be careful!" Right at this moment, a voice rang out from afar, sounding extremely panicked. However, it was already too late. Hua! Just as the voice fell, the shadow of the sword slashed through the air, and the man in black was directly cut in half. Immediately, blood and flesh flew everywhere. In the next moment, a strange dark rune appeared in the bloody light and instantly enveloped Mu Jin. Mu Jin clearly didn't expect that there would be such a scene after the black-clothed man died. Caught off guard, she was actually wrapped up by the dark runes. Boom! She reacted immediately. Sword will burst out from her body in an attempt to disperse the runes, but she was still a step too late. Several runes had already invaded her body. In an instant, Mu Jin felt the meridians in her body tighten, as if they were being imprisoned by an invisible force. Her expression couldn't help but change. The heavenly spirit throne of Feng Tian is only SOSO. Just then, another black-robed man rushed over. He was a bladesman. His entire body was bursting with saber will. His entire being was like an erupting volcano as he charged over. Seeing this, Mu Jin wanted to make a move, but she discovered that her meridians were being suppressed by a hidden force, causing her strength to decrease by 30%. Bang! At this critical moment, a shadow of a spear fell from the sky. With a dull thud, it instantly broke the bladesman's attack. Mu Jin raised her head and saw that Yunting had arrived. "Spirit Lord, are you all right?" Yunting's figure landed. His burly body was like an iron tower, standing between heaven and earth. "I'm fine." Mu Jin took a deep breath and shook her head. However, she could feel that the hidden force in her body had not disappeared. In fact, it was even showing signs of becoming stronger. This feeling made her expression change. Could it be that she had fallen into the King of Hell's coffin? If that was really the case, she would rather die than become a walking corpse. Don't be nervous. You have to relax and maintain a stable breathing. Do not use your celestial force again. At this moment, Mu Qianlan and Nie Tian also arrived. The former looked at Mu Jin and said in a deep voice. Mu Jin frowned. How could she stand by and do nothing in this situation? "Spirit Lord, don't worry. Leave these small fries to me." Yunting smiled faintly, looking heroic. "Believe in him. He can handle it." Mu Jin wanted to say something but was stopped by Mu Qianlan. I'll go and help too. Nie Tian nodded. His figure moved, and the sky sword in his hand appeared. The sword intent around him surged like the sea. The sword momentum shook the heavens and the earth as it pressed down on the black-clothed men below. Seeing this, more than a dozen black-clothed men immediately resisted, but they were suppressed by Nie Tian and their bodies kept falling. How is this possible? Mu Jin's pretty face sank when she saw this scene. She was surprised. Just now, these black-clothed men joined forces, and even she was forced to retreat. However, Nie Tian had single-handedly suppressed the black-robed man with his sword momentum. This was simply unbelievable. Could it be that Nie Tian was stronger than her, the spirit lord of Feng Tian, at such a young age? In fact, Nie Tian was about the same age as Mu Jin. However, in terms of martial arts age, Nie Tian was very young. And Mu Jin was already middle-aged in terms of immortal age. In terms of real strength, Mu Jin was obviously much stronger than Nie Tian. There were many reasons why Nie Tian could suppress the black-clothed men with his sword momentum. First of all, the black-clothed men had used up too much energy to force Mu Jin back, so they were a little exhausted now. Secondly, Nie Tian's attack caught them off guard. He took the initiative and caught the black-clothed men off guard. Finally, for some reason, Nie Tian's sword intent seemed to have a natural suppression on the black-clothed men's netherworld chi. Kid, your sword is very strong. High up in the sky, Yunting looked a little excited. He shouted and released the spear momentum around him. When the spear fell, countless spear shadows directly pressed over with a momentum that could swallow the sky. Bang! 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 Then, a series of muffled sounds were heard. The bodies of more than a dozen black-clothed men directly exploded. Even the dark runes that escaped were directly crushed under the double pressure of the spear intent and sword intent. Mu Jin's beautiful eyes deepened. She was shocked by the scene in front of her. She did not expect that Yunting and Nie Tian would cooperate so perfectly that they could kill more than a dozen black-clothed men at once. After a while, the spear intent and sword intent dissipated. But there was still a black-clothed man standing on the immortal ground. Dark runes surged around his body, and his aura was extremely strange, causing people to feel an inexplicable sense of fear. Mu Qianlan frowned. His eyes were locked on that strange black-clothed man, and there was a faint feeling of unease in his heart. Mu Jin's expression was also a little ugly as she also looked at that black-clothed man. Pretending to be mysterious, deliberately mystifying. However, Yunting frowned and sneered. The cloud sword in his hand turned, and where the tip of the spear pointed, the spear shadow directly attacked the black-clothed man. Chapter 4602. Mu Qianlan's pupils constricted when he saw Yunting make his move. He did not know why, but there was an inexplicable fear in his heart that he could not get rid of. The spear moves the world, the clouds move. High up in the sky, Yunting let out a thunderous roar. The spear in his hand swept out like a dragon, and a copious amount of spear intent erupted. With a single strike, the wind and clouds in the surroundings were swept up, and the shadows of the spear covered the sky as they pressed down on the black-clothed man. The man in black's body was surrounded by dark runes that moved faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, it was like a storm. Bang! In the next moment, the spear's shadow fell and the two forces clashed. The void rumbled and the spear's shadow was like an empty shell that was crushed by the rune storm. How is this possible? Yunting's face changed as he screamed and retreated, dodging the attack. Is this the power of Feng Tian Peak Constellation? The man in black stood where he was and suddenly raised his head. His eyes were as dark as the abyss and there were strange runes surging around his pupils. He looked extremely evil. Also, his voice was extremely sharp. When it entered the ears, it was like a sharp blade that could disturb one's mind. Damn it! Yunting had a bad temper. When he heard the man's mockery, he was enraged. He bellowed, and the spear aura around him exploded again, rising to an even more terrifying level. Nie Tion's eyes narrowed as he felt the ripples of the spear aura in the air. He was shocked. Yunting's cultivation was at the 5th stage of the immortal venerable realm, and his strength was comparable to a sky martial saint ancestor. If he reached the 6th stage of the immortal venerable realm, he would not be weaker than a sky martial saint ancestor. The spear moves the clouds and thunder, splitting the shore. Yunting was enraged. He bellowed, and the spear aura around him rose to the extreme. The endless spear aura seemed to be tearing the sky apart. "That's more like it." However, the black-clothed man merely smiled faintly. Clearly, he still did not place Yunting in his eyes. "Die!" Yunting let out a low roar, and the cloud-edge spear shot out. A terrifying spear shadow whistled through the air like a dragon. The wind and thunder didn't stop, and the pressure caused people to tremble in fear. The black-clothed man's figure did not move, and he continued to stand where he was. However, the dark runes around his body moved, and they instantly condensed into a sharp, dark blade. It seemed to have no might, but it contained an extremely terrifying nether energy. Boom! Then, the spear shadow fell, but was blocked by the dark blade. Following that, the netherworld force completely exploded, and the destructive power directly shattered the spear shadow. "Be careful!" Mu Qianlong immediately sensed that something was wrong and couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Unfortunately, it was too late. Pooh! In the next instant, before Yunting could even react, his chest was pierced by the dark blade. The terrifying netherworld force instantly spread throughout his body. In the blink of an eye, Yunting's face turned dark purple. "You pfft!" He was shocked, and just as he was about to speak, he spat out a mouthful of blood. "It seems that I have overestimated you." The black-clothed man smiled faintly, not concealing his disdain. "Hold your breath, don't be angry." Yunting wanted to say something more, but Nie Tion's figure arrived, and a wave of yuan qi flowed into his body, allowing him to breathe a little. Yunting was shocked, and he looked at Nie Tion in surprise. He didn't expect the latter to have such powerful strength. "Oh!" Seeing Nie Tion's actions, the black-clothed man couldn't help but be surprised, and then he laughed. "And you, little fella, I have underestimated you. Come on, let me play with you next." Nie Tion's lips twitched, and he steadily landed on the celestial ground. He didn't know why, but the black-clothed man in front of him gave him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Mu Jin and Yunting's expressions changed, and they were momentarily speechless. Nie Tion actually wanted to fight the black-clothed man head-on? Wasn't that courting death? But now, both of them were injured, and the only one who could continue fighting was Nie Tion. "Kid, you're young, but you're quite brave." The black-clothed man's face was covered by a black robe, and his appearance couldn't be seen clearly. Only strange dark runes could be seen surging in his dark pupils. "Then let's try." Nie Tion smiled faintly, and his expression suddenly turned cold. Inverse Godfiend runes appeared at the corner of his eyes. Godfiend body activated. The black-clothed man suddenly felt the change in Nie Tion's aura, and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, "So, you're not from the Immortal Qi continent. You're from the outside world, interesting." Sword intent God-piercing. Nie Tion's lips twitched coldly, and the sky sword appeared. The sword intent was so sharp that it was even stronger than Yunting's spear intent, but it wasn't as dense as Yunting's spear intent. With Nie Tion's current understanding of the sword Dao, he could completely use some simple sword techniques as he pleased. He no longer had to adhere to a fixed method of attack, and unknowingly, he had already reached the second layer of the heavenly perception realm, which greatly improved his sword Dao strength. In addition, the power in his body was becoming more and more integrated, which greatly improved his combat power. The moment he swung his sword, the four directions moved. The black-clothed man felt a chill, and unhurriedly, dark runes surged out from his palm. They turned illusory in the air, and like thousands of dark snakes, they spread out. Nye Tian was caught off guard, and his body was enveloped by the dark runes like chains, binding him. Nye Tian. Mu Jin's expression changed when she saw this, and she couldn't help but scream. Oh no! Mu Qianlan's expression also turned ugly. He knew that the dark runes were the runes of the King of Hell's coffin, and the Yin underworld qi contained within them was enough to threaten a sixth realm grand immortal venerable. Nye Tian was bound by the King of Hell's curse seal, and his life was at stake. So that's all there is to a martial cultivator. The black-clothed man defeated his opponent with a single move, and with a cold smile, his figure flashed, and his palm pounced straight at Nye Tian. Is that so? The corner of Nye Tian's lips curled up into a smile, and the divine demon force in his body burst forth. His eyes suddenly flickered with a cold light, and his body shook, and the King of Hell's curse seal shattered. Bang! Then, he stretched out his hand, and his palm collided with the black-clothed man's. The sudden change of events caught the black-clothed man off guard, and it was too late for him to retreat. He was sent flying by Nye Tian's palm. On the other hand, Nye Tian was as steady as a mountain, and his figure didn't move at all. This. High up in the sky, Mu Jin, Mu Qianlan, and Yunting were stunned by the scene before them, and they gasped in unison, unable to speak for a while. Only now did they know that Nye Tian was actually so terrifying. The group of young immortals in the distance were even more dumbfounded. They were all immortals that cultivated on Yingwu Peak, and they had all obtained top 10 in the Sky Beacon competition. They were publicly acknowledged geniuses of the immortal Tao in their sex, and they naturally had an air of arrogance in their hearts. But at this moment, facing Nye Tian, a fellow who looked to be around their age, they no longer had the slightest bit of arrogance, and there was only a deep sense of defeat. Only now did they know that there was actually such a shocking figure in this world. Chapter 4603. Young man, good plan. The man in black steadied himself. Though he looked a little haggard, he wasn't too heavily injured. He immediately realized that Nye Tian purposely allowed himself to be trapped by the curse of Pluto in order to lure him into attacking. He had to admit that even though he was mentally prepared, he still underestimated Nye Tian's capabilities. I really want to see what kind of face you have under the black robe. The corner of Nye Tian's lips curled up. His face was now covered with the inverse devilish mark. The devilish qi around him shot up to the sky, and his qi was extremely oppressive. You don't have the right. The man in black coldly snickered. He activated the curse of Pluto again. Instantly, the terrifying qi expanded and engulfed the entire area. It was as if the world had fallen into an endless purgatory. It's an enchantment. Mu Qianlan's eyes narrowed and he couldn't help but shout. It seemed like the man in black was angry and wanted to kill Nye Tian with an enchantment. Mu Jin and Yunting's expressions changed at the same time. They looked extremely ugly. Under normal circumstances, perhaps Nye Tian would have a chance to fight against the man in black. However, the man in black activated an enchantment. How could Nye Tian have a chance? An enchantment? Nye Tian felt the eerie qi in the air, and he couldn't help but frown. However, his face didn't show much of a reaction. He didn't feel any obvious suppression. It was as if the enchantment didn't affect him at all. Burial of the King of Pluto's soul, limitless underworld. At this moment, the black-robed man let out a low roar. Then, the earth rumbled and split open. A black hand broke out of the earth and grabbed Nye Tian. Watch out! Mu Qianlan saw this and he couldn't help but scream. Mu Jin and Yunting's eyes widened and their hearts were in their throats. But right now there was nothing they could do. They could only watch helplessly. Die! The man in black sneered and clenched his fist in the air. Suddenly, the dark hand tightened, trying to squeeze Nye Tian to death. The 9 dragon veins in Nye Tian's body revolved crazily, the fiend god qi burst out, his entire body was covered with some kind of reverse pattern. The clear sky sword spun in the air, An incomparably sharp sword chi slashed the hand of darkness, and the fiend god chi rushed out in all directions, forcibly breaking the restraint of the hand of darkness. Under the huge impact, the man in black had to take a few steps back before he managed to stabilize himself. How is this possible? The black-robed man looked at Nye Tian in shock, his eyes filled with disbelief. In his nether boundary, even a sixth-stage great immortal venerable was not his match. Even though Nye Tian was an outsider, his aura was only as strong as that of a human celestial monarch in the fifth stage. How could he break his nether king's soul burial? Although Nye Tian was an outsider, his chi was only at the fifth realm human rank immortal venerable. How could he break his netherworld king's soul burial? Mu Qianlan and the other two were also stunned by the scene in front of them. They looked at Nye Tian blankly. Mu Qianlan thought that even if he was in his peak state, if he was trapped in the netherworld boundary, he would probably be in danger. Mu Qianlan thought that even if he was in his peak state, he would probably be in danger if he was trapped in the netherworld king's soul burial. Nye Tian shouldn't have such strong power. What was going on? Your boundary is only SOSO. Nye Tian laughed and took a step forward. The divine devilish chi around him roared like a tsunami that could sweep everything. You're courting death. This time, the black-robed man was truly enraged. With a bellow, he thrust his palms out simultaneously. His nether king seals whizzed out, morphed into thousands of sharp blades, and slashed towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian was not afraid at all. He swung his sword in the sky, sweeping away the netherworld. Then, he swung his sword 3 times in a row. The sword's shadows were like mountains, pressing down on the man in black, forcing him to retreat. Impossible. This is impossible. The man in black retreated more than 10 meters. He could hardly stand still. His expression was full of shock. He couldn't believe that he would be forced to such a state by a young man from the outside world. It's time to end this. Nye Tianling stood in the air. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Then, his figure turned into a ray of light and charged towards the man in black. The black-clothed man's pupils couldn't help but constrict. Before he could even react, his neck was tightly gripped by a strong and large hand. You are not afraid of the netherworld force. The man in black was shocked. The netherworld force around him was slowly dispersing. Come at me. Let me see who you are. Nye Tian ignored him. He smiled coldly and slowly lifted the black robe. The moment the black robe was lifted, the face that appeared before Nye Tian made him frown. This was an extremely ugly face that was full of holes. It was as if it was scalded with boiling oil. His facial features were all squashed together, making people want to puke. How is it? Are you satisfied with my face? The man in black suddenly laughed. His eyes that were as dark as the abyss suddenly shrunk. Immediately, 2 strange rays of light shot out and entered Nye Tian's eyes. Nye Tian couldn't help but furrow his eyebrows at the sudden change. Then, the man in black lost all signs of life. Like a pile of mud, he collapsed to the ground. Nye Tian loosened his grip and the man in black dissolved into a puff of black gas. Nye Tian was puzzled. He couldn't react for a moment. Although the man in black's face was extremely ugly, it gave Nye Tian an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Moreover, the aura of the man in black made him feel strange. He felt that he had met him somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. Nye Tian, are you okay? At this time, Mu Qianlan's figure landed and looked at Nye Tian with a worried face. He clearly saw the 2 rays of black light that were released from the man in black's eyes. If he wasn't wrong, the 2 rays of black light were the seal of the king of Hell's coffin. In other words, the current Nye Tian was most likely in the king of Hell's coffin. I'm fine. Nye Tian smiled and took a deep breath. He didn't feel any discomfort. Mu Qianlan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. Kid, I really didn't expect you to be so strong. Yunting's figure landed and he couldn't help but look at Nie Tian with a smile. With a smile, Nie Tian glanced at the three of them and asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes." Mu Jin nodded. She had been hit by the Yin force, and it had been forced out of her body. Yunting was the same. His complexion turned for the better. Where did these men in black come from? Why are they targeting the Fengtian sect? After a while, Yunting's face darkened as he voiced out the doubts in his heart. They are indeed cultivators who have been hit by the King of Hell's coffin. As for whether they are related to Genie Feng, I'm not sure. Mu Qianlan frowned and said in a deep voice, "Since these men in black know about Wu Peak and Heart Valley, it means that they are very familiar with the Fengtian sect." Mu Jin frowned and her pretty face was filled with worry. Wu Peak and Heart Valley are the secret places of the Fengtian sect, but the men in black can accurately find them. This means that there must be someone behind them who knows about the Fengtian sect very well. Could the mastermind be Genie Feng? Or could it be the Sky Beacon Inquisitor Duwui? Chapter 4604. For a moment, Mu Qianlan could not conclude that the men in black were related to Genie Feng. Mu Jin's heart was also in a mess. A faint sense of foreboding was getting stronger and more real. It was as if there was an invisible hand in the darkness that had already grasped the Heaven Wind sect's lifeline. Once the time was right, the Heaven Wind sect would be pushed to the point of no return. Although they had killed a group of men in black, Nie Tian and the other three still had ugly expressions on their faces. The group of young immortals in the distance had also returned to the immortal ground, but they only dared to look at Nie Tian and the others from afar, not daring to approach. They were all smart people, and could already tell that something big was about to happen to the Fengtian sect. Peak Spirit Master, I suggest that we activate the Seamless Sky Beacon. After a long time, Mu Jin's eyes flashed with a strange light as she suddenly looked at Yunting. Ah! Yunting's expression changed when he heard the words Seamless Sky Beacon, and he could not help but exclaim in surprise. "It's time." Mu Jin was very calm as she said indifferently, "Spirit Master, you and I should both understand what activating the Seamless Sky Beacon means." Yunting took a deep breath, clearly forcing himself to calm down. "Has the Fengtian sect really reached this stage? What do you think?" Mu Jin's beautiful eyes narrowed as she inadvertently glanced at the dozen or so Fengtian sect genius disciples not far away. Yunting frowned. There was obvious uneasiness in his eyes, and it was obvious that he was thinking about something. "Both of you, what is the Seamless Sky Beacon?" Nie Tian looked at Mu Jin and Yunting, and could not help but ask. However, neither of them answered. It was Mu Qianlan who coughed dryly and explained, "The Seamless Sky Beacon is a secret place under the earth vein of the Fengtian sect. It is also the most mysterious and core place of the Fengtian sect. Legend has it that the Seamless Sky Beacon was built by the first Fengtian immortal. It is protected by a powerful immortal array both inside and outside. It is the last barrier and hope of the Fengtian sect. Seamless Beacon Sky is impregnable. Rumor has it that it can withstand the attacks of over 100 great immortal venerables at the same time. It is impossible for anyone to break through the Seamless Sky Beacon from the outside. The Paragon Saint Immortal Venerable built the Seamless Sky Beacon so that when the Fengtian sect was on the brink of death, there would be one last spark left. After that, Mu Qianlan looked at Mu Jin and Yunting and nodded deeply. He was also in favor of activating the Seamless Sky Beacon because the Fengtian sect was already in danger of being destroyed before the enemy could be identified. Even though the black-robed man had been killed by Nie Tian, it was clear that he wasn't the true leader. Perhaps he was just a pawn. No one could predict what kind of terrifying opponents were lurking behind the black-clothed men. All in all, in order to prevent any accidents, they should indeed activate the Seamless Sky Beacon. The matter of the Seamless Sky Beacon is of great importance and cannot be easily decided. Yunting frowned and said after a moment of thought, The Fengtian sect is the leader of the immortal sects in the immortal Qi continent and has stood for countless years. If we retreat into the seamless sky beacon because of this, it will be too risky for the sect. Peak leader, I know what you are worried about, but you have also seen that the enemy we are facing this time is not ordinary. Mu Jin was very calm and said, "The reputation of the sect is important, but it is insignificant compared to the danger of being destroyed." Nie Tian frowned and was puzzled. Could it be that retreating into the seamless sky beacon would harm the Fengtian sect in any way? Mu Qianlan saw Nie Tian's puzzlement and smiled bitterly. Although the seamless sky beacon is stable, it consumes a lot of energy every time it is activated. Therefore, every time it is activated, it will take at least a few hundred years to activate again. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He did not expect it to be like this. In this way, Yunting's worries were not without reason. The current Fengtian sect was the leader of the immortal sects and stood firmly at the peak of the immortal Tao. But if they retreated into the seamless sky beacon, it would take a few hundred years to come out again. This was equivalent to hiding from the world. After a few hundred years, who knew what kind of changes would happen to the immortal Tao? Perhaps at that time, the Fengtian sect would be reduced to a second-rate sect if it came out again. No matter what, I do not agree with opening the seamless sky beacon. I think that the Fengtian sect has not reached a moment of life and death. Yunting thought and said, "Moreover, opening the seamless sky beacon requires the approval of the immortal sovereign. If the immortal sovereign is not here, it also requires the approval of the Three Peak. Just the two of us have no right to decide whether or not to open the seamless sky beacon. What do you think, senior leader?" Mu Jin's gaze slightly focused and suddenly looked at Nie Tian and asked. Nie Tian could not help but be stunned and did not react for a moment. Mu Jin was calling him. "What did you call him?" Yunting's expression suddenly changed and he asked in surprise. He clearly heard Mu Jin call Nie Tian senior leader. "Senior leader," Mu Jin said faintly and said, "Before the previous senior leader died, he gave the Ring of Judgment to Nie Tian, so his current identity is Sky Beacon Inquisitor." This. Yunting's expression froze and he was immediately speechless. Nie Tian actually obtained the Ring of Judgment and became Sky Beacon Inquisitor. This was too unacceptable. Whether you accept it or not, this is the truth. Mu Jin was still calm and said faintly. But he. Yunting's heart was filled with mixed feelings, and he did not know what to say. Sky Beacon Inquisitor, the head of the Three Peaks, an existence in the sect second only to the Fengtian Immortal, how could he be an outsider? Nie Tian originally had nothing to do with the Fengtian sect, and he was not even from the Xian Qi continent. Such a person inexplicably became Sky Beacon Inquisitor. How could he accept this? Senior leader, what do you think about the matter of Endless Beacon Sky? Mu Jin did not give Yunting time to recover and looked at Nie Tian again and asked. Spirit leader, do you really want me to make this decision for the Fengtian sect? Nie Tian took a deep breath and looked at Mu Jin with a heavy gaze. At this time, the Fengtian Immortal was in seclusion. The previous Sky Beacon Inquisitor was dead, so only Mu Jin and Yunting had the right to make the decision. The two had different opinions. Mu Jin revealed Nie Tian's identity at this time and let Nie Tian express his opinion. It was obvious that she wanted Nie Tian to make the decision. If Nie Tian supported Mu Jin, then he would open Endless Beacon Sky. If not, then he would temporarily not open it. Imperceptibly, the fate of the Fengtian sect fell on Nie Tian's shoulders. Mu Jin, Yunting, and Mu Qianlan all focused their eyes on Nie Tian, waiting for the latter to speak. Spirit leader, peak leader, the matter of opening Endless Beacon Sky is too big. I want to wait until I become the real Sky Beacon Inquisitor before making a decision. Nie Tian took a deep breath, thought for a moment, and said, You want to wait until you establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment before making a decision, right? Mu Jin's eyes narrowed and asked. Yes. Nie Tian nodded and said, Before that, we can arrange a relatively safe place for the sect disciples. Yes, that's fine. Yunting immediately nodded and agreed with Nie Tian's decision. Mu Jin frowned and did not say anything more. Chapter 4606. The 8th Floor. Mu Qianlan suddenly heard Nie Tian say the 8th floor, and his face suddenly changed. He never thought that Nie Tian would actually directly enter the 8th floor of the Ring of Judgment. From the 1st floor to the 9th floor of the 9-story tower formed by the Ring of Judgment, to enter each floor, one must obtain the approval of the Ring of Judgment. In other words, one must have a certain talent before the Ring of Judgment would allow them to enter. Although Mu Qianlan had never been an inquisitor before, he was quite familiar with the Ring of Judgment. Normally, after the Inquisitor established the bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, they could basically easily enter the lower 3 floors. As for the middle 3 floors, about half of the people could enter, and the Inquisitors who could enter the upper 3 floors were extremely rare. The 7th and 8th floors were still okay. Basically every Inquisitor could enter at the later stages. The 9th floor was the most difficult, known as the Forbidden Land of the Ring of Judgment. The Fengtian sect had no idea how many Inquisitors there were, but those who had entered the 9th floor could not be counted with 2 hands. Nie Tian had just established the bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, and could actually directly enter the 8th floor. This was really beyond Mu Qianlan's expectations. It seemed that Nie Tian's talent was far better than ordinary people, so he could obtain the approval of the Ring of Judgment. More importantly, the secret that Mu Qianlan wanted to know happened to be on the 8th floor of the 9-story tower. He originally thought that if Nie Tian wanted to enter the 8th floor, it would take some time. He did not expect that he could enter directly, which saved a lot of trouble. Previously, he was even prepared to use a forbidden technique to connect with Nie Tian's divine soul, and replace Nie Tian to explore the 8th floor of the tower. Now it seemed that there was no need. Nie Tian, what did you see? Mu Qianlan resisted the excitement in his heart and asked anxiously. But the strange thing was that Nie Tian was in a daze and did not respond. In the spiritual space, Nie Tian suddenly saw something floating in the center of the 8th floor. He quickly stepped forward and took a step forward, but it made him stunned. The thing floating in front of him was a coffin. Moreover, this coffin was extremely strange. It was covered in dense talisman symbols and runes, and if one looked carefully, they actually seemed like babies. Although the coffin itself had no aura, Nie Tian felt an indescribable murderous aura, which made him suddenly feel an inexplicable anger. Open! Nie Tian took a deep breath. With a thought, he opened the coffin. But strangely, no matter how hard he concentrated, the coffin did not respond. Nie Tian, what did you see? At this moment, Mu Qianlan's voice sounded again. He was obviously a little anxious. Nie Tian frowned. After thinking for a moment, his divine sense left the 9-storied profound pagoda. Nie Tian, what's going on? What did you see on the 8th floor? When Mu Qianlan saw that Nie Tian had a reaction, his eyes widened in anticipation. A coffin. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he described the coffin. The murderous aura of thousands of babies. After listening to Nie Tian's words, Mu Qianlan's face suddenly changed, and he said 4 words. What do you mean? This time, Nie Tian's face also changed, and he asked in surprise. When he looked at the coffin, those strange talisman symbols looked like babies, and the entire coffin had an extremely heavy murderous aura. It turns out that the King of Hell's coffin came from the Ring of Judgment, it's true. Mu Qianlan seemed to not hear Nie Tian's words, but was talking to himself with a dazed look. Mu Qianlan, what are you talking about? Nie Tian frowned and said in a low voice. Mu Qianlan calmed down a little, stared at Nie Tian for a long time, and then said, Initially, when I was cultivating the King of Hell's coffin, Du Wu Yi once told me that the King of Hell's coffin is a kind of curse from the Ring of Judgment. At that time, I didn't believe it, but now it seems that what he said was actually the truth. You mean that the coffin on the 8th floor of the mysterious pagoda is the King of Hell's coffin? Nie Tian's heart sank, and he asked in shock. Yes. Mu Qianlan nodded, and said in a deep voice, if I didn't guess wrong, the coffin you saw is the King of Hell's coffin. As for the talisman symbols on the coffin, they should be the murderous aura of thousands of babies. The murderous aura of thousands of babies? Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Mu Qianlan nodded again and said, in the past, after I cultivated the King of Hell's coffin, I felt that something was amiss, so I secretly investigated the King of Hell's coffin. Heaven rewards those who persevere, and I finally found the records of the King of Hell's coffin in an ancient book of the Fengtian sect. According to the ancient book, in ancient times, there was an ancient saint who called himself Heaven Punisher. He cultivated evil arts and massacred hundreds of millions of living beings, causing the other ancient saints to be furious. But Heaven Punisher was extremely powerful, and even more than a dozen ancient saints joined forces to defeat him. In the end, this matter alarmed one of the 9 strongest ancient saints, the 9 great ancient saints. The 9 great ancient saints discussed and decided that one of them would take action to quell Heaven Punisher's chaos. That ancient saint Venerable's strength had reached the peak of the ancient saint realm, but he was old and weak, and he was seriously injured in the battle with Heaven Punisher. But he didn't fail to fulfill his mission and successfully killed Heaven Punisher. But Heaven Punisher cultivated evil arts and was difficult to kill. That ancient Saint Venerable could only take out Heaven Punisher's heart and use the King of Hell's coffin to imprison Heaven Punisher's soul. In order to completely cut off Heaven Punisher's chance of escape, that ancient Saint Venerable used his own blood essence to forge a ring called the Ring of Judgment. Then, he placed the King of Hell's coffin into the Ring of Judgment and imprisoned Heaven Punisher forever. After doing all this, that ancient Saint Venerable almost exhausted the last of his strength. But after that, he held on for several years and created the current Fengtian sect. He made the Fengtian sect guard the Ring of Judgment for generations to come. But unfortunately, the Ring of Judgment was passed down for only a few generations before the Fengtian sect forgot its responsibility. At this point, Mu Qianlan couldn't help but sigh, and then she continued, when I found out about all of this, I originally wanted to make it public, but I didn't expect that when I was looking for this ancient book again, it would be destroyed by someone. Later on, I was expelled from the Fengtian sect and never had the chance to talk about this again. If that's the case, Heaven Punisher's soul is imprisoned in the King of Hell's coffin. Nie Tian was shocked to hear this. He didn't expect that there were so many things behind the small ring of judgment. Then, what is the evil spirit of thousands of babies that you mentioned? Nie Tian took a deep breath to calm himself down and asked in a deep voice. The evil spirit of thousands of babies is the seal outside the King of Hell's coffin. Mu Qianlan's eyes were a little dim and his expression became strange. He said in a deep voice, do you know how the evil spirit of thousands of babies is refined? Nie Tian shook his head. He could clearly see that Mu Qianlan's chest was slightly heaving up and down. He was obviously a little excited. It's refined from the resentful spirits of hundreds of thousands of babies who are less than 3 days old. Mu Qianlan's eyes were as sharp as a blade as he said in a deep voice. What did you say? Nie Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed and his expression changed greatly as he cried out in shock. Chapter 4607. Mu Qianlan's words shocked Nie Tian on the spot. He felt as if someone had hit his heart heavily. The evil qi of thousands of babies was actually refined from the resentful souls of hundreds of thousands of babies who were less than 3 days old. This was too shocking. The Netherworld King's coffin was refined by His Excellency Ancient Holy Venerable. Does that mean these hundreds of thousands of babies are? Immediately after, Nie Tian thought of something and his face changed. He couldn't finish his sentence. That's right. Mu Qianlong, of course, knew what Nie Tian was talking about. He nodded and said, "These babies were killed by Ancient Holy Venerable. His Excellency Ancient Holy Venerable is also responsible for these thousands of heavy killings." This. Nie Tian was flabbergasted and couldn't utter a word. The duty of the 9 Ancient Holy Venerables was to protect the heavenly continent. Who would have thought that this Ancient Holy Venerable would sacrifice the lives of hundreds of thousands of babies just to seal the heaven punishment? It had to be said that such a method was really hard to accept. Everything that Ancient Holy Venerable did was absolutely without the slightest bit of selfishness. After a long time, Mu Qianlong said, if he didn't seal the heaven punishment, the number of killings that the heaven punishment had created would be more than hundreds of thousands. With that said, Mu Qianlong suddenly looked at Nie Tian. A strange light flashed in his eyes as he asked, killing one person to save 100. If it were you, would you do it? Nie Tian's brows furrowed. His heart trembled, not knowing how to answer. He had once heard a story. There was a boulder that slid down from the top of a mountain and smashed into a small village. There was a man who could change the trajectory of the boulder. However, once the boulder's trajectory was changed, a bystander would be sacrificed. So, should this man change the boulder's trajectory? In other words, should he sacrifice an innocent person to save a village? The story was very similar to the situation that Ancient Holy Venerable was facing. It was obvious that Ancient Holy Venerable chose to sacrifice one person to save a village. If the same question was placed in front of Nie Tian, how would he choose? I don't want to. After a long time, Nie Tian gave his answer and shook his head. Kill one and save 100. To the 100, it was a great fortune, but to that one, it was a great disaster. If Nie Tian was faced with the same situation, he would never choose to sacrifice the innocent. If the situation was too extreme to be salvaged, he would rather sacrifice himself. Just how much courage and perseverance did Lord Ancient Saint Venerable have to make such a decision? Mu Qianlong exhaled deeply, his eyes filled with respect. Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy and he did not speak. Is the secret you want to know about the Yama's coffin? After a while, Nie Tian became cold and couldn't help asking. Yes. Mu Qianlong nodded and paused for a moment before saying, I've always wondered why Du Wui wants so many people to cultivate the Yama's coffin. Now I think I know why. Why? Nie Tian's eyes flickered and he asked nervously. Du Wui wants to unseal the heaven-punishing seal. Mu Qianlong's face was gloomy and he said word by word. Nie Tian's expression changed and he was speechless. The heaven-punishing seal was an ancient saint and not an ordinary one at that. Even an ancient saint venerable couldn't kill him completely and could only seal him. If the heaven-punishing seal was unsealed, wouldn't it be a calamity for the immortal Qi continent? Who was Du Wui and why did he want to unseal the heaven-punishing seal? The Yama's coffin is sealed by the evil spirits of thousands of babies. The evil spirits of thousands of babies are refined from the resentful souls of babies who are less than 3 days old. They are extremely resentful and evil. Mu Qianlong's eyes darkened and he continued, if you want to unseal the evil spirits of thousands of babies, you must find something more evil than the evil spirits of thousands of babies, which is the curse of the Yama's coffin. The Yama's coffin contains the evil souls of the children of 3 so it's more evil than the evil spirits of thousands of babies, right? Nie Tian immediately thought of what Mu Qianlong had said and his eyes trembled violently. Yes. Mu Qianlong nodded and said, as long as there's enough curse of the Yama's coffin, you can unseal the evil spirits of thousands of babies. So, you still think that everything is Du Wui's plot, right? Nie Tian took a deep breath and asked. He still couldn't believe it. Du Wui was the Sky Inquisitor, so why would he do this? Mu Qianlong nodded and said, I can't think of anyone else besides Du Wui who could do this. Indeed, Du Wui was very suspicious. Those men in black were all people who were affected by the Yama's coffin, and they were very familiar with the Fengtian sect. They even knew core places like the Heart Valley and Ing Wu Peak very well. Coupled with Jin Yifeng many years ago, Mu Qianlan had reason to suspect Du Wui. If Mu Qianlan's guess was right, then Du Wui's identity was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. If it's really as you said, and Du Wui wants to unseal the Heaven Punishment Ring, then he should at least have the Ring of Judgment in his hands, right? But he gave the Ring of Judgment to me. Why? Nie Tian frowned and asked the question in his heart. This is also my question. Mu Qianlan sighed and said, maybe he can't enter the 8th level of the Ring of Judgment, so he can only use you. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. This was indeed a possibility. But even so, how could Du Wui be sure that Nie Tian would enter the 8th level and be willing to hand over the Yama's coffin? Oh no. When Nie Tian thought of this, his face suddenly changed and he asked anxiously, where did you hide my friends? Mu Qianlan was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and said, let's go now. After saying that, Mu Qianlan immediately rushed out and Nie Tian followed. Soon, the two arrived at an extremely secluded place in the Fengtian sect, the Juetian Cliff. The Juetian Cliff was one of the 3 forbidden areas of the Fengtian sect. Every Fengtian immortal of the Fengtian sect would be buried at the Juetian Cliff after his death. In the sect, apart from the Fengtian immortal and the 3 fire beacon towers, only a few core members of the sect knew about the existence of the Juetian Cliff. After Mu Qianlan controlled Mo Rushi and the others, he hid them at the Juetian Cliff for safety reasons. At this moment, Mu Qianlan and Nie Tian arrived outside the Juetian Cliff and rushed in. However, the cave in the Juetian Cliff was empty. There was no one there. Mu Qianlan looked at the cave in front of him and was speechless. When he hid Mo Rushi and the others here, he did not confirm that Du Wui was the suspect. Although he suspected Du Wui many times after that, he forgot about Mo Rushi and the others. Others might not know about the Juetian Cliff, but how could Du Wui not know about it as the Sky Inquisitor? At this moment, Mu Qianlan and Nie Tian finally understood how Du Wui was sure that Nie Tian would obediently hand over the Yama's coffin. Chapter 4608. Nie Tian and Mu Qianlan looked at the empty Juetian Cliff and understood what had happened. Nie Tian's body trembled slightly. There seemed to be a flame burning in his heart, making him feel like he was about to explode. Nie Tian, it's my negligence. Mu Qianlan felt Nie Tian's strong emotions and his face darkened. He said in a deep voice, but don't worry, I'll definitely find them. Nie Tian's chest heaved slightly, obviously suppressing the anger in his heart. He did not expect something like this to happen. Mu Qianlan indeed had to bear the main responsibility, but the real culprit was the person hiding behind the man in black. Moreover, at present, everything about the mastermind behind the scenes was just Mu Qianlan's speculation. As for what the truth was, it was still unknown. I really didn't expect you two to find me so quickly. It seems that I left too many clues. At this moment, a playful voice came from the inside of the spacious cave. Then, a black figure appeared like a ghost. Nie Tian's face suddenly changed. He fixed his eyes on the man in black and asked, who are you? Mu Qianlan, you should be able to guess who I am. The man in black smiled and asked Mu Qianlan. It really is you, my dear senior brother, Jin Yifeng? Mu Qianlan's face was gloomy and his eyes were sharp. Nie Tian's heart suddenly trembled. It turned out that the man was Jin Yifeng, who was known as the exclamation of the sky. Su come, Jin Yifeng. It's been a long time since someone called me that name. I feel strange myself. Jin Yifeng. It's been a long time since someone called me that name. I feel like it's unfamiliar to me. Since you've appeared, the person behind this should be Du Wui. Since you've appeared, The person behind this should be Du Wui. Mu Qianlan's eyes darkened, and a strange light flickered in his eyes. He was obviously looking forward to Genie Feng's answer. Forget it, right? Genie Feng nodded slightly and said, but for things to develop to this point is indeed beyond my expectations. Who are you people? Why are you doing this? Sensing Genie Feng's coldness, Mu Qianlan's palms couldn't help but sweat as he stepped forward and asked. In his memory, the eldest senior brother was a talented and kind person who treated people well. But now, how did he become the cold and vicious demon in front of him? Mu Qianlan, do you think that what we're doing now is unforgivable? Genie Feng smiled again before he let out a sigh and said, actually, there is no right or wrong in many things, it's just that we have different standpoints. In the end, you and I are chess pieces in this torrent, and we're bound to float along with the wave. What the hell are you talking about? Mu Qianlan's face was cold. Genie Feng's inexplicable mystery made him very annoyed. Forget it, you'll understand in the future. Genie Feng shook his head, then he turned to look at Nie Tian and said, next, let's talk about you. Where are my friends? The sword essence in Nie Tian's body surged, and his eyes were cold, but he was secretly gathering his pupil power. Don't worry, they'll be fine for the time being. Genie Feng seemed to have noticed Nie Tian's unusual movement, but he wasn't nervous. Instead, he said, if you can hand over the coffin of Yama, I can guarantee that your friends will come back safely. Can I believe your guarantee? Nie Tian asked coldly. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and asked coldly. Genie Feng was no longer the amazing person he used to be, but had completely become a fallen demon. How could his words be trusted? You don't have a choice. Genie Feng smiled and said, you're an outsider, so you shouldn't be involved in this torrent. Unfortunately, no one can avoid fate's arrangements. Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he said in a deep voice, Du Wui is behind you. He couldn't take the coffin of Yama out of the Ring of Judgment, so he gave the Ring of Judgment to me, right? You're very smart. Genie Feng nodded and said, Lord Yang Zun really didn't choose the wrong person. Yang Zun? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he said, is that Du Wui's new name? It sounded like Du Wui and Genie Feng were backed by a powerful organization that wasn't any weaker than the Fengtian sect. Stop guessing. You just need to hand over the coffin of Yama to us, then leave the Xian Qi continent with your friends, and never come back. Genie Feng naturally knew what Nie Tian was thinking, and he said with a faint smile, how can you be so sure that I can take out the coffin of Yama? Nie Tian's face darkened and he continued to ask, we're not sure, but we're sure that you'll save your friends. Genie Feng smiled again, full of confidence. Genie Feng, what are you planning? Mu Qianlan opened his mouth again, cold. Don't you already know? Why bother asking? Genie Feng smiled and said, the unsealing of the Heaven Punisher is the future of the Xian Qi continent. No one can stop it. As expected, Mu Qianlan's heart couldn't help but tremble. Genie Feng and the others were really trying to understand Feng Zhutian. But what good would it do to Genie Feng and the others if they unsealed the Heaven Punisher? Mu Qianlan, you could have been a member of the Heaven Punisher like me, but you chose the wrong path. Genie Feng suddenly took off his black robe, revealing his handsome face, and said cold, what are you compared to me now? You. Mu Qianlan's face changed when he saw Genie Feng's face. The current Mu Qianlan had the appearance of a young man. He hadn't changed at all compared to when he died. So many years had passed, but Mu Qianlan hadn't aged at all. What exactly happened to him? Surprised. Genie Feng enjoyed Mu Qianlan's expression very much. He said in a loud voice, join the Heaven Punisher, and you can also obtain an immortal body. I don't care. Mu Qianlan calmed down and said in a cold voice, what about you? Genie Feng turned to look at Nie Tian and said, are you willing to join the Heaven Punisher? I just want to save my friend, wrote Xinbeian. Calm. Nie Tianling replied coldly. All right, I will come again in 3 days. If you can hand over the King of Hell's coffin, I will return your friend to you. Genie Feng wasn't surprised by Nie Tian's decision at all. Instead, with a faint smile, he blurred into action and vanished like a streak of light. Mu Qianlan and Nie Tian looked at the place where Genie Feng disappeared with gloomy faces. Nie Tian, don't worry too much. After all, we already know that the people behind all this are Du Wui and Genie Feng. After a long time, Mu Qianlan coughed to comfort Nie Tian. They have more than this. Nie Tian shook his head. He couldn't hide the worry on his face. Genie Feng addressed Du Wui as Yang's supremacy, which meant that the two of them were most likely backed by a powerful organization. Du Wui and Genie Feng were just the tip of the iceberg. At this moment, Nie Tian felt an invisible pressure pressing down on him, as if it was going to crush him completely. Chapter 4609. After leaving the extinguishing immortal cliff, Nie Tian immediately returned to his residence and concentrated on studying the Ring of Judgment. 9-storied mystical pagoda, 8th floor. Nie Tian looked at the King of Hell's coffin and carefully observed every rune and curse seal on the coffin. He didn't understand the curse seals, but after careful study, he discovered that although the curse seals of the thousands of babies on the coffin were extremely similar, there were subtle differences. And the strange thing was that Nie Tian actually felt a strange aura from the thousands of babies' curse seals, as if these curse seals were alive. Could it be that, among the thousands of babies' curse seals, there are the souls of those babies? Nie Tian frowned, his heart full of questions. According to Mu Qianlan, the thousands of babies' curse seals were refined from the resentful souls of dozens of babies. Could it be that the souls of these babies were still alive? This guess made Nie Tian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. If it was really like this, didn't it mean that if the curse seals of the thousands of babies' curse seals were lifted, the souls of these babies could be released, and if they could find a suitable body for them, they could even be resurrected? The thousands of babies' curse seals on the King of Hell's coffin are at least tens of millions of years old. Just as Nie Tian was puzzled, Fat Cat's voice sounded and said, "For such a long time, the curse seals of the thousands of babies' curse seals have not weakened at all. It is indeed a bit strange." Fat, did you discover anything? Seeing that Fat Cat spoke, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but flashed as he asked. Any rune and curse seal, no matter how strong, will slowly weaken with the passage of time. Fat Cat took a deep breath and said, I discovered that the curse seals of the thousands of babies' curse seals did not seem to weaken at all. This is really strange. Fat, have you seen such a curse seal before? Nie Tian didn't understand the curse seal, so he continued to ask. No. The Fat Cat shook its head and replied, This kind of curse is very ancient, much older than the nine-tailed chinchilla clan. However, if I'm given some time, I should be able to see through the mysteries of the seal. How long do you need? When Nie Tian heard what Fat Cat said, his eyes trembled again. At least a few months, at most a few years. Fat Cat replied. Nie Tian's face froze, and he shook his head helplessly. He didn't have that much time. Genie Feng only gave him 3 days. Once the time was up, the latter would probably take extreme measures. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the room, Nie Tian's expression was extremely ugly. 3 days had passed, but there was no progress in his research on the Netherworld King's coffin. The Nether King's coffin was too mysterious and strange, causing Nie Tian to have no idea where to start. Looks like I can only fight them head-on. Nie Tian frowned and walked out of the room. If he couldn't hand over the Netherworld King's coffin, Genie Feng wouldn't let him go. Then, Nie Tian only had one choice left. Fight Genie Feng head-on. Of course, he knew that Genie Feng was extremely powerful and not someone ordinary could compare to. Mu Qianlan once said that Genie Feng was already the strongest person in Sky Beacon. Even the Feng Tian Immortal wasn't his opponent. In the end, they only managed to capture Ji Feng after the Fengtian Immortal and the 3 Sky Beacon Towers joined forces. After so many years, no matter how strong Ji Feng was, he would be much stronger than before. Nie Tian estimated that even if he joined forces with Mu Jin and Yunting, they might not be Ji Feng's opponent. However, there was only one path left in front of him, and he had to take it even if he didn't want to. Nie Tian, how is it? At this time, Mu Qianlan's figure appeared. He was also very anxious as he asked directly. Nie Tian looked depressed and shook his head helplessly. Looks like I can only fight Ji Feng head-on. Mu Qianlan was obviously prepared for this. He wasn't surprised at all and instead said indifferently, Nie Tian looked at Mu Qianlan and suddenly felt that the latter's aura was stable and strong. He couldn't help but ask, "You've recovered?" 3 days ago, although Mu Qianlan's aura was stable, it wasn't as strong as it was now. In just 3 days, Mu Qianlan was able to recover to his original state and was even stronger than before. It was really unexpected. Mu Qianlan nodded with a smile and said, Nie Tian, I said that I will help you find him. Thank you. Nie Tian saw that Mu Qianlan was ready and nodded to thank him. Let's go, Feng Zhu is still waiting outside. Mu Qianlan smiled and led the way. After the two met up with Yunting, they went straight to Juexian Cliff. Feng Zhu, Ling Zhu went to ask the Immortal Lord to come out. Is there still no news? On the way, Nie Tian couldn't help but ask. A few days ago, Mu Jin went to ask the Fengtian Immortal to come out, but there was no news. It was really strange. Normally, when such a big thing happened in the sect, the Fengtian Immortal should have sensed it. Why hasn't he come out yet? No. Yunting shook his head. Although he tried to hide it, the panic in his heart could still be seen. He had the same question as Nie Tian, but there was nothing he could do. He could only wait. Yunting, when you see Ji Feng later, don't be too surprised. Mu Qianlan looked at Yunting, changed the topic and smiled bitterly. Yes. Yunting nodded his head, but his heart was filled with fear. Once upon a time, he saw Ji Feng as his role model. But now, he had become Fengtian Feng Peak Constellation, and Ji Feng had become the sinner of the sect. After a while, Nie Tian and the other two arrived at Juexian Cliff. In the cave, Ji Feng stood there coldly, as though he had arrived early. It's really you. When Yunting saw Ji Feng, although he was mentally prepared, he could not help but be surprised. Of course, he recognized Ji Feng's appearance. After so many years, Ji Feng had not aged at all, which he could not understand. Yunting from Fengtian Feng Peak Constellation. Ji Feng looked at Yunting with a weird smile. Then, his gaze swept across Nie Tian and Mu Qianlan. Since the three of you are here, it seems that you do not intend to hand over the coffin of the King of Hell. You want to fight me. I do not have the ability to take the coffin of the King of Hell out of the Ring of Judgment, but I must save my friend. Nie Tian took a step forward and said coldly. The sword intent around him boiled like an unsheathed sword. Facing the powerful Nie Tian, Ji Feng smiled and said with disdain, Do you think that with your current strength you have the chance to win me? Yes. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he said one word. Ji Feng smiled again and said, Your courage has exceeded my expectations. But in this world, courage is not the only thing that can survive. But I am in a good mood today, so I can give you a chance. You want me to join heaven's execution? Nie Tian's eyes darkened and said coldly, In your dreams. There is no need to join heaven's execution. Ji Feng's lips twitched and his eyes flashed. He looked at Mu Qianlan and Yunting for a while and said, As long as you kill the two behind you, I will return your friend to you. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. He never thought that Ji Feng would want him to kill Mu Qianlan and Yunting. Mu Qianlan and Yunting's expressions changed as they looked at Nie Tian.